Okay, we're going to begin. Kindly take your seats. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, welcome to the Marine Ports Committee. Welcome to the great city of Long Beach, maybe the coolest place in Southern California at this moment. All at 92 degrees, but nonetheless. Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for joining me. Councilmember Mitchell, Councilmember Robinson, Dr. Joe Liu. Thank you to AQMD staff and to those here at the hotel for your hospitality and welcoming us here. Today we'll hear the progress of two ports, both Long Beach and Los Angeles ports, on the Clean Air Action Plan 3.0. It's a work in progress, and I'm sure we'll be tweaking a little bit. That will need some tweaking, but it's, I believe, going in the right direction. The ports have made significant reductions in every category, but as we all demand, we'd like to see more progress in the reduction of emissions. Fact that just came out with Gene Sirocco on the Los Angeles side, the port saw an increase in cargo. At the same token, saw double-digit reductions in emissions. So moving forward, and similar to the AQMD, the ports will have to find some dollars in order to meet some specific targets. In government, we always say everything is possible with dollars. And hoping that we can partner with all levels of government to find those dollars needed to help with our air quality. We'll also be looking at additional resources and partners to hit our targets and our goals. This includes state and feds, of course, looking at mobile sources. And let me remind everyone that 20% of all emissions are stationary, with the other 80% mobile. No pressure, Judy. But nonetheless, I'm looking forward to the presentations today in the Marine Ports Committee. And with that, we'll now, we do have a teleconference location, is that correct?
Yes.
And
Supervisor Ashley, the line's open. We just don't know if he's there.
Supervisor Ashley, are you on the line? Okay, we'll wait for his arrival. Nonetheless, we do have a quorum. And with that, let me remind those in the audience to fill out a comment card. We do have cards floating around or not? We just ask people to just come forward. We'll hear the two items, and upon each presentation, we'll take public comment. So with that, if I can turn your attention to item number 1, which is an update on the San Pedro Bay Ports Draft Clean Air Action Plan. We have a presentation by both ports, Long Beach and Los Angeles. Thank you for your presence.
Good afternoon, board members and staff. Thank you for the opportunity for us to speak today. My name is Lisa Wonder. I'm the Marine Environmental, can you hear this? I'm the Marine Environmental Manager at the Port of Los Angeles, and myself and my colleague Heather Tomley will be making the presentation jointly together today on the update and status of our Clean Air Action Plan. But before we go into that, we want to present the results of our latest 2016 air emission inventory, which was just released by both ports a couple weeks ago. And we're happy to report continued decrease in emissions across the board, across all major contaminants, with diesel particulate matter down 87% from 2005 to 2016, NOx down 56%, sulfur oxides down 97%, and greenhouse gases down 18%. And this is all during the same time period where TEUs were up 10%, showing that we are able to reduce emissions even though we're able to see our economic gains. Yesterday we had a very large public meeting, and I wanted to address one of the comments I heard there that said a lot of these emission reductions happened in early years, and in recent years we've been pretty level. So I wanted to present the 2015 to 2016 numbers also. I have for the Port of LA, I think Port of Long Beach is as good or better. DPM between 2015 and 2016 down 13%, NOx down 10%, SOx down 14%, greenhouse gases down 6%, and all this while TEUs went up 9%. So we're very proud of our 2016 results and how far we've been able to come in the last year, and we feel this shows our continued progress. So I did mention our very large public meeting yesterday. We took about 2.5 hours of public testimony at that meeting. It was very helpful and informative. We have our draft cap document on the street. The last time we were here at this meeting, we had our discussion document recently out. Between the discussion document and the release of the draft cap, we had about 50 meetings, both large meetings and targeted meetings with the different agencies and groups that you see on the slide in front of you. After the release of the draft cap, we probably had 10 to 20 more meetings, and our calendars are booked with more meetings, and we're very open to meeting with anyone who's interested in meeting with us. All right, so the goals from our discussion document to the draft cap was to revise the draft cap strategies based on all the comments that we'd received in all these meetings, and also provide additional information. There were some different board actions, regulatory actions that happened in between the time of the discussion document and the draft cap that we wanted to also incorporate, provide more information, provide more background. And we have a little word art here showing a lot of the themes we heard in our public outreach. At the very center is the talk of zero emissions, community health, cost, infrastructure, many topics that I'm sure you're very aware of that we've had to take into account in hearing the discussion document and the incorporating those concerns into the draft document. So I'm going to quickly go over some of the programs that did not have substantial changes between the discussion document and the draft document. It's not that these ones are not major programs, they are. It's just there seemed to be a consensus moving forward that we were going in the right direction. The first one is a vessel speed reduction program. Both ports currently offer incentive for ports at both 20 and 40 nautical miles. We're looking to really focus that in at the 40 nautical miles because we already are having a 20%, over a 90% voluntary participation at 20 nautical miles. Increase the incentives to focus on 40 nautical miles so we can increase those percentages as well. Incentivize energy efficient improvements on ships. Both the ports currently have incentive programs. The Port of LA has the ESI program. The Port of Long Beach has a Green Ports program that provides financial incentives for the cleanest ships to come into the ports. We're looking to revise those incentives to also give incentive points or other financial incentives to ships based on various energy efficiency measures and include that in our calculation of financial incentives. We're also looking at a clean ship program, which would have a differential rate structure to incentivize cleaner ships to come into the Port of Los Angeles, charge higher rates for the older Tier 0 ships starting 2025, and incentivizing financial incentives for hovercraft repowers. Currently, all hovercraft are at or near Tier 2, looking to upgrade those to Tier 3 and Tier 4, cleanest available. Terminal equipment idling reduction, that's very important. A lot of equipment is idling on terminal, a lot of emissions there. If we can get that equipment to be retrofitted with idle reduction, a lot of emission reductions are expected from that program. Both ports are in current plans and actively expanding on-dock rail capabilities. We're looking to continue those programs. We both have departments in our respective ports that are developing plans for that and getting more cargo off of trucks and onto rail. The charging standards for cargo handling equipment, that's similar to what happened a couple decades ago with the personal vehicles, about getting one piece of charger, one standardized charger available so all cargo handling equipment can plug in. And we're working in a collaborative group with the agencies on that, and it seems like that's been making a lot of progress recently at the CARB level. The Green Terminal Program, that would be kind of like a lead program. We still need to work out the deals on that, but it would look to provide a rating and a reward system for a terminal that would be deemed as a green terminal. And supply chain efficiency incentives, that would also be providing incentives for modes of the supply chain which would be able to show efficiency improvements. And of course, to do all this with additional non-diesel alternatives at the port, infrastructure plans for other types of fuels and energy sources and energy strategies are all necessary in concert to move forward with that. So I will move on to Heather for the next part of it.
Thank you, Lisa. So what we wanted to emphasize for all of you today, I'll back up a little bit, it's a little echoey. We wanted to talk through some of the things that have modified from the last discussion that we had with you, the changes that were made between the discussion document that was released last November and the draft cap that was released about a month and a half ago. And so one of those areas that had some changes from our previous presentation is how we're approaching the cargo handling equipment measure. Our goal in the original discussion document was to get to zero emissions for the terminal equipment by 2030, and that we would do feasibility assessments to evaluate our progress and identify the remaining challenges every 5 years. So those would have been done in 2020 and 2025. Last March at the California Air Resources Board meeting, there was a direction by the board to staff to move forward with developing amendments to the existing cargo handling equipment regulation to get to up to 100% zero emissions in the terminals by 2030. So that mirrored the approach that we were taking in the timeline and goals that we had for cargo handling equipment. So what we've identified in our draft cap is that we would be participating in that rulemaking process to help to facilitate the development of that rulemaking, identify how the port can play a role in easing barriers to implementation of that strategy, how we can help to accelerate where that's feasible, and that we would also continue to conduct those feasibility assessments, but we would do that on a more frequent basis from what we had originally identified, because we heard some comments through the process that the information that would be gained through those feasibility assessments would be critical for helping us to remain on track with achieving that 2030 timeline, and that we needed to have that information available sooner in the process and more frequently. So we're proposing to do our first feasibility assessment in 2018 with updates to it every 3 years so that we can stay informed about our progress in the development of the technologies, the development of the infrastructure, and the economic factors that will go into achieving the 2030 timeline. So our approach is really going to be identifying the ways that the ports can help to facilitate the regulatory effort. And this is a similar approach to what was so successful the first time around with the Clean Air Action Plan, where the ports were taking early action, but the state regulation came in as sort of a backbone to provide the certainty that the requirements would move forward. And so the ports help facilitate the implementation of those strategies. So we're taking a similar approach here with cargo handling equipment. For at-berth emissions, the situation is similar. In the original discussion document, we had identified needing to develop those technologies and do demonstrations of alternative technologies to help address emissions from the other vessel types that are not currently captured by the shore power regulation, and that we would look at ways to incentivize the use of those technologies once they're proven. In March, at the California Air Resources Board meeting, the direction from the board to staff was to develop amendments to the at-berth regulation as well that would address capturing up to 100% of the emissions from vessels at berth. And so our intent now is to participate in that process, support that process, identify ways that we can continue to ease the barriers to implementation for this strategy as well. One of the things that the ports will be doing in the next couple months will be releasing an RFP for demonstration of alternative technologies that will help to fund through our technology advancement program so that we can test out the use of alternative systems on the other vessel types and help to get them in place so that we can move forward with starting to use them. The Clean Trucks program strategy is probably the strategy that had the most significant changes from the discussion document. There were a few reasons for this. Among them were the substantial volume of comments that we received on this strategy. This strategy has been and always will be the focus of the efforts that we're doing at the ports. This program has always gotten the most attention and is a subject of a lot of comment and input. And so we took those comments very seriously as we were looking at what would be the best way and most effective way to structure the program. There was also, with the approval of SB1, while it didn't specifically address the ports and the authority of the ports, what it did was it identified that the state would not be moving forward with a regulation anytime soon on trucks, which was the situation that we were in the first time around when we adopted the Clean Trucks program, where we were able to accelerate the timelines and implement them here locally at the port complex. Without a state regulation, we needed to relook at the types of mechanisms that we could move forward with within our jurisdiction that we felt were defensible and could be effective at moving the trucks into the cleaner trucks that we want to see operating here. And so we structured the program around a couple mechanisms. One is new registrations into the drayage truck registry. So for any new trucks coming in, they need to meet minimum performance standards, and then also establishing a rate structure for all trucks, but with exemptions for the trucks that meet the emissions performance standards that we want to see. And so starting almost immediately in 2018, we would be implementing a requirement for any new trucks coming into the drayage truck registry that they have to be model year 2014 or newer. And these are the trucks that have the cleanest engine standards. In 2023, when the state would be implementing their near zero emission standard for manufacturing standard for trucks, we would then be requiring that only trucks that meet that standard could newly register into the program. So any new trucks coming into the drayage truck registry would have to meet that near zero standard starting in 2023. And this is also the year that we would initiate the rate structure for all trucks with exemptions for trucks that meet near zero or zero emissions. And we believe this will provide an economic incentive for accelerating the introduction of those trucks. This is also the year that the state regulation, truck and bus regulation, comes into effect that requires that all trucks meet 2010 standards at a minimum. So there will be currently about 55% of all of the trucks in the port drayage truck registry do not meet the 2010 standard. So all of those trucks will need to be transitioning over this time period to meet the state's regulations, and what we propose to do with this program is to help facilitate the transition into the near zero and zero emissions sooner. The rate structure would continue forward to 2035, and at that point, only trucks that meet zero emissions would be exempt from that rate. A few other elements also related to the truck program that we think support what we're trying to achieve. Again, the feasibility assessments will be conducted every 3 years starting in 2018 on the same schedule as the cargo handling equipment assessments. We will also be waiving any registration fees for zero emission trucks from the beginning, and this again provides a small economic incentive to bring in those trucks sooner. We also intend to work with the state on the development of a heavy-duty smog check program, which we would launch here in the San Pedro Bay Port Complex first, and then that could be a model that could expand throughout the state. And this could be a way for us to identify the trucks that are not being maintained properly or not meeting their emission performance standards, and that they would be either brought up to the proper standards or eliminated from the fleet. We also intend to move forward quickly with other ways to accelerate the early introduction of zero emissions trucks. And we want to identify duty cycles where those zero emission trucks could be implemented more quickly. And we would be working on implementing a pilot program of a larger scale deployment. And this would build on the demonstration projects that bring to get an empty, returning an empty, and some of the other things that can result in hangups at the terminal if those things are not ready to go when the truck arrives. And so we're looking to develop a program that can increase the efficiencies of those truck transactions, allow the trucks to do more turns, and if they can make more turns, they can make more money, and they can be in a better economic situation to be able to afford these cleaner trucks. We developed a lot of supporting documentation as well that went along with the Clean Air Action Plan draft update, and a lot of these provide some of the analyses that help to support the development of strategies and provide some information that's important to understand the type of benefit that we're expecting to see from some of these strategies. All of these are available on our website, and some of these documents, like the emissions analysis, have been the subject of quite a lot of conversations between us and your staff. So we wanted to provide these documents to provide supporting information for what we're doing. One point that I do want to make is the Clean Air Action Plan is a plan. It's a high-level policy document that helps to provide the goals and directions for where we're going, similar to your air quality management plan. And a lot of the details on implementing these strategies and coming up with the specific implementation plans, that work will be done once we approve that plan. And that's where we'll get into a lot more of the details of defining all of the expected emission reductions for all of the different strategies. And so while this provides some good supporting information at this point, there is definitely more work to be done as a follow-on to the development of this plan. One of the documents included the incremental costs associated with implementing this document, and we made a lot of assumptions about how some of these things would be applied, and the expected costs of some of these technologies. So all of that information is laid out in the cost estimate that we provided. There have been comments about these cost estimates, and some folks believe that different assumptions are more appropriate. We wanted to provide this information so that we had an understanding at this point. This will also be the subject of those feasibility assessments that will continue to update this information as we go forward so that we can continue to refine these estimates. But on the low end, the cost could be in the $7 billion range, and on the high end, $14 billion range. The original Clean Air Action Plan, we estimate that the costs were about $2 billion to estimate. So the costs associated with this Clean Air Action Plan update are much greater than they were the first time around. Those costs for the original cap were implemented primarily over about a 5-year period. These costs carry us forward through 2035, so it is over a longer time period as well. But the costs this time around are greater than they were the first time. And that presents a challenge, and why we have initiated discussions with your staff about joint advocacy for funding to help support what we're all trying to accomplish. Schedule-wise, we are in the public comment phase. We released the document in mid-July, and we will be continuing to accept public comment through mid-September. Lisa had mentioned we had the public workshop last night, and we got a lot of really good comments. We're continuing to gather written comments as well. And we are continuing to meet with folks. I think we have about a dozen more presentations scheduled over the next couple weeks to different groups to garner additional comment. And then the intent is to bring the final document back before a joint a meeting of our both Board of Harbor Commissioners on November 2nd, where they'll consider the plan. And this is the website and the email address associated with the CAP. So that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Before I turn over to my colleagues, I do want to ask a couple questions. And obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty. And if you look at the cost estimates, the low end is nearly at $7 billion, high end $14 billion, nearly double that, right? How did you come up with those estimates? What was how did you determine the cost estimates on the low end and the high end?
A lot of it has to do with different technologies and the best estimates that we can make at this time of what we think those technologies will cost. So for trucks, there's a big range there. On the low end, we're looking at some of the battery electric technologies and looking at the most competitive prices that we think might be available for those. On the high end, we're looking probably more at the fuel cell technologies. We're expected to be much greater. And so it does have a variety based off of the best information that we could gather at this time about what the estimated costs will be. It's important to keep in mind that those vehicles, those pieces of equipment for cargo handling equipment as well, are not currently commercially available, and so we're making our best estimate at what we think those costs will be.
Understood.
And most of the criticism we've received have stated that it would be a lot higher than what we've estimated because we are making assumptions that equipment that's not available today will be available in the future, whereas other estimates have not made those assumptions.
I'm also surprised that there's currently no heavy-duty smog program. There's not one in place today.
That's
No.
correct.
And then lastly, I understand you had a great response last night, and that was your first community meeting on,
That was the first one
public
during
hearing?
this draft CAP process.
Okay.
We've had 2 other meetings associated with the CAP process in general, related to the discussion draft and before we initiated the process. But we've had, I think Lisa mentioned, over 50 meetings with different community groups, just not public
So
workshops.
what were the underlying things from what you heard last night from the public?
I would say there were several different themes, and not all consistent with each other, as I'm sure you can appreciate. There were a lot of comments about support for getting to zero emissions, but interest in seeing that happen sooner. Some of the comments said that they would like to see transition to zero emissions by 2023. Other comments were about zero emissions is a good long-term goal, but there are technologies that are available today that can be implemented over the next 5 years to get to near zero, which can get us 90% cleaner than where we are now. And so a lot of interest in focusing on the near-term emission reductions, and which could, the argument was that could be much more cost-effective as well. And general interest in just making sure that we move forward and do it as quickly as possible.
Sure.
There were several comments also from truck drivers about the truck conditions.
Understood. Okay, colleagues?
Go first. I always have time, so you can.
Go ahead, Dwight.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate that. And I think your first slide about reductions and then also talking about 2015 to 2016 reductions was very helpful for me. I really appreciate that. I think that you all have done a fantastic job. But as Councilmember Buscaino mentioned, there's still a lot of work to be done. And so that's why we're here today. I did have some they're more specific questions. I understand this is a plan and you're going to get into the specifics, but my first question is just with respect to at birth. And I've heard a little bit of feedback about cold ironing or shore power and some of the challenges with different sized vessels and not being able to plug in now. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, help me understand it a little bit more, and what's being done to solve that problem? Because I think that if it doesn't get solved, it's only going to be exacerbated by continuingly larger ships with different locations for plug-in, things like that.
Right, just as background, when we started developing the design for installing the vaults along the berths for shore power, we made some assumptions about the types of vessels that we expected would be coming and what the placement along the berth needed to be able to support plugging in those vessels. The movement towards larger vessels happened more rapidly than any of us expected, and that affected where the use of those berths and where the vessels needed to have vaults located to be able to plug in. So that has been a challenge at some of the terminals. The vessels will come in, shore power will be installed on the berth, the vessel is ready, but the cord isn't long enough to get to the plug. So we've been working through those issues, working with the shipping lines, working with the terminal operators, working with our electrical engineers, working with the California Air Resources Board staff, and we've been making progress towards getting over those hurdles.
Okay, does that seem like it's in progress, something that's going to be resolved pretty quickly, and do we have any?
I don't know about pretty quickly. There's
Okay.
probably other people in this room that could answer that better than I can. I don't want to belittle that there are definitely challenges with it, but it's something that we're all very aware of, and we're making the efforts that are necessary to make sure that that's being addressed.
Great, okay, well, just any feedback with our staff, and if I can get an update on that once we can talk with the right person, I would appreciate that. You mentioned in the presentation about expanding on-dock rail, so what percentage of movements are currently utilizing on-dock rail versus last-mile trucking, and what can be done to expand on-dock rail? What are some of the impediments that keep us from getting to 100% for those intermodal containers that are moving into the heartland of the country and not necessarily staying here regionally?
So I think last year we were at 28% of all of the cargo leaving the port complex going by on-dock rail. Our goal is to get that up to, we're building the infrastructure to get up to 35%, but our long-term goal is to get to 50% of all of the moves to go by on-dock rail. And some of the things that we're doing is looking at the infrastructure that we currently have available within the terminals and throughout the port complex so that we can make sure that the infrastructure is in place so that we can not have bottlenecks. We've got the amount of storage track that we need to be able to build those longer trains and get them out of the port. One of the projects at the Port of Long Beach that we're currently working through the draft environmental impact report process phase with is our Pier B on-dock rail support facility. And what that will do is build out additional mainline track and storage track at a location within the harbor district so that we can better utilize the infrastructure that's available within the terminals. Right now, they have a limitation on the amount of storage track that's available in the terminals. And so if they build sections of cars, that takes up working track, working space. So we need to have infrastructure within the port complex so they can move out those cuts of cars and assemble the longer destination trains within the port complex, but not do that within the facilities on the terminals. So building out that additional storage track helps them to be more efficient in building those on-dock trains and get them out of the port complex to their destination. That facility will help us to get towards that 35% goal. But there's other operational changes that will be necessary to get to the 50%, and that includes things like looking at other types of cargo that we don't normally send by on-dock rail now, and looking at ways that maybe we could send that on rail out of the port complex. Some of the cargo that's maybe not destined to go outside of the region, maybe it could go to an inland rail yard and then be distributed from there, but it could leave the port complex on rail. We're investigating those strategies to see if it can result in benefits. We don't want to shift an emissions problem from our location to another location, so we need to make sure that we're not developing unintended consequences with that. We want it to be an overall benefit, but those are the types of things that we're looking at of other operational changes that could help us to maximize the amount of cargo going out on rail.
Great, well, thank you very much. It's very explanatory, so appreciate that. The 28% right now and then getting to 35 with a hope to get to 50, is that all cargo or is that just intermodal moves into the middle of the country? got it.
Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I understood what the numbers were, so, okay.
It was the 35% was, you said, was intermodal, and then the
15.
additional would be on top of that, the regional, local.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. I've been hearing a little bit about, and this might just be in Port of Los Angeles and not necessarily in Long Beach, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's something you're both working on. But this is the partnership with GE Transportation, and I've been very impressed with what you're doing from a big data collection standpoint and how that could potentially improve the efficiencies inside the port. I know right now it's mainly focused on vessels and a lot on the import side, which is exactly where the focus needs to be. But I see some synergies with the trucking industry, and I know kind of getting into an appointment system concept is heading in that direction. But the earlier that data can be provided, that a trucker's going to pick up an import container or an exporter is about to go deliver one, and how that coordination can occur, I think is very valuable. I haven't been receiving a tremendous amount of positive feedback, not to say that it's been negative, but not a whole lot of positive feedback about the appointment systems that are currently in place. So they help to a certain extent, but it hasn't alleviated, some of the long lines and things like that. So I know that that's one part of what you're hoping to do to increase some efficiency. Again, you mentioned the truck drivers being able to get more turns, and in doing so, being able to have some revenue to afford the additional trucks. What do you think needs to change with that appointment system? I mean, why would it work in the future rather than right now it's maybe just neutral?
I think there's a lot of challenges with it, and this is why we're giving ourselves a few years to be able to make sure that we can develop this, working really closely with the industry, because clearly this needs to be a system that not only gets to the goals that we're trying to achieve, but really works for the industry so they adopt it and embrace it and get the benefits from it. So some of the things that we heard is that some of those individual appointment systems don't include all of the different things that can delay the transaction at the terminal. Like, for example, a truck driver could arrive with a bobtail and want to pick up a chassis, but that chassis is not available. Well, that wasn't a part of the appointment that they made to secure that chassis, so they have to wait there for the chassis to become available so that they can pick up their box and leave. Some of them will arrive with an empty box, but the terminal isn't ready to accept that empty, so they'll have to go take that someplace else. That can also affect their ability to meet their appointment time. And a lot of the appointment times aren't even being met. So for appointments that are being made, a lot of them aren't even being kept. Some of that could be that they got held up in one location and then they missed their next appointment, but there are a lot of different challenges with developing a program that can be effective to increase the overall efficiency, and we're going to need to work with the industry to get through those challenges. But the idea would be that it would be a system that could make sure that we're looking at all of those different aspects that can get the truck caught up and take the time to make that turn and make sure that that's applied universally across all of the terminals.
Great, well, thank you. I'm very optimistic. I think there's a fantastic opportunity here. It's slow going. I know that this is a very complex thing with a bunch of trucking companies of various sizes. We're not just talking about really big ones with great data systems and dispatching programs. We're talking about sometimes just very small independent owner-operators or whatever it might be. So I know there's a big challenge there, but I appreciate the fact that you guys are cognizant of that. I have a few more, but I'm just going to try to condense this all in because I know Joe's got a bunch of questions too. The last question was just mainly focused on what changed from the initial draft to today with respect to the trucks. In 2018 going to 2014 plus. Trying to remember exactly what that was, but I didn't see anything. So in the initial one, it was basically if a truck was 10 years or older, then it was going to be phased out. So is there any phase out, or are we focused on now the SB1 provision, and that's really when a truck would get phased out? There'd just be some, I guess, some cost differential, you'd have to pay some sort of fee if you're using an older truck or something like that. Am I understanding this clearly?
I guess I would characterize what we're trying to do with the way the program is now structured is aiming for specific emission performance standards. So being very explicit that we're trying to get trucks into the near zero and zero emission trucks. The 10-year rolling ban was to try to address the trucks that were older, had higher levels of deterioration of their emissions, and trying to get them phased out. But from what we heard, that 10-year rolling ban is fairly arbitrary and won't necessarily get you in the direction that you want to go with reducing emissions. That smog check program will help us to identify the trucks that are not meeting the standards and that need to be repaired and eliminated from the system. But the primary focus of what we're trying to do with our program is to signal that it's the near zero and the zero emission performance standards that we want to see, and we want to see those as soon as possible.
Great, okay. Just last thing, since you mentioned the smog check part, I understand there's I want to say it's maybe called a smoke check right now. My understanding is that that's not necessarily done through how we would view smog checks with commercial vehicles. It's kind of done through maybe the actual companies themselves, and they're self-reporting, but I'm not really sure if I clearly understand it. So maybe you could explain that, and then what would be the process for the smog check?
I think we'll have to work through the process in coordination with the state agencies, because this will need to be a program that works for them, because ultimately they're the ones that are implementing it. We want to help to facilitate it and do what we can to assist them in developing it and to help make that move forward. But the specific process for how it will work, I'm not sure if it means that there'll be smog check stations like we use for our passenger vehicles, and the truck companies will have to go and get those emissions testing before they can get registered. We'll have to work through those details of exactly what the mechanics will be. But it's my understanding that the existing requirement is more of an opacity test. So it's like a smoke check where they look at the visible emissions coming out of the exhaust. This would be more of an tailpipe emissions test. So you could evaluate the actual emissions coming out of that tailpipe and how that matches up with what the engine performance standard is for that engine.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all your answers to the responses, all your answers to the questions. And I'm typically not one that likes to see more and more regulation, I have to say, but this smog check process that you're talking about, I think it inserts some fairness into the system right now. There's definitely a lot of bad actors out there that they need to be held accountable, and those good actors, we need to make sure that they're not penalized in some way where someone out there has some competitive advantage because they're not complying. So I see that as a positive. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councilmember. Dr. Liu?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Buscaino. I guess I'll foreshadow a little bit of what my comment will be tomorrow morning when we get together with the full board, but one of the issues I did want to raise based off a conference that Matt and Wayne and I attended last week before? Can't remember, I don't know, last week, right? In Asilomar was the compliance issue, and the ARB estimates that 30% of the trucks on the road are not in compliance with the particular filter requirement. And that is completely unacceptable. And then I'll save the other thing. I'll just foreshadow. There's another statistic that I have for tomorrow morning. I'm going to save that one in my pocket. Anyway, nice to see you again, both of you. It's only been a few hours. You received a lot of comments last night. I think you would agree that of all the comments you received, mine might have been just a little bit better, right? Just kidding. No, it was a great meeting. I thought you did get a lot of feedback. I thought you've characterized that feedback very, very, very well. But today I get to get in a little more detail. See, I've given you more than 2 minutes, so I'm going to take more than 2 minutes. There were a lot of people. They could only give 2 minutes last night. I don't think it was wrong. It was just that there was a tremendous turnout, and it was good to see so much interest in it. just to get to the heart of one of the things that I find very concerning with regard to the new proposal, there's an assumption that trucks will turn over. There's no requirement other than new trucks that are registering into the program. And I want to know how we can guarantee that those trucks will turn over, because based off the truck drivers we talked to last night, they cannot afford new trucks. If the funding doesn't come through and they're stuck having to buy new trucks, why won't they buy say like in 2023, you won't be able to register anything other than something newer in 2014, right? Is that the way it was structured? How do we know that there's not just going to be a run on those 2014 trucks at the last minute in order to avoid having to come in compliance with future requirements and not have to actually register a new truck? I mean, if you're a business person, a small independent truck owner or a big company, aren't you going to be looking at ways to reduce your expenses? And wouldn't that mean that you would wait till the last minute, buy an older truck, and drive that truck until until it blows up or doesn't run anymore?
I guess I would argue if you're looking to minimize your expenses, you'd also be looking to avoid the fee. And the first time around with our clean truck program, when we had the truck fee that was implemented, that was the most effective part of that program. And we saw transition to the cleaner trucks 2 years in advance of when the requirement came into effect for those trucks. And so we anticipate when trucks do transition, they'll be looking to get into those near zero and zero emission trucks to avoid that rate.
But the first fee is not going to kick in until 2023. And
Right.
that fee would be on 20 trucks older than 2014, right? The 2007 to 2014.
The rate would apply to all trucks operating in the port complex with exemptions for near zero and zero emission trucks.
In 2023.
And so starting in 2023, but as folks are transitioning those trucks into the newer trucks, we would expect that they would be looking forward to what truck they can keep for the long term and purchasing trucks that they know that they could continue to operate and avoid that rate.
Okay, and what about the registration thing? They would still be able to register a 2014 and 2023, or is that, I'm confused now.
So the new registration requirements, starting right away, we would require that anybody new coming in would have to be 2014 or
2014,
newer.
right.
But in 2023, anybody new coming in would have to be near zero.
Okay, that's what it was. I thank you for clarifying that. My concern about that was the studies that have come out of UC Riverside CSERT about the 2014 trucks not showing a whole lot of benefit from even the 2007 trucks because of the operation in low speed and high loads. So I'm not sure that policy decision from the get-go is going to get us immediate emission reductions that we need to come into compliance with national ambient air quality standards and state air quality standards. So it's just a little bit of feedback there. And with regard to that fee, it kind of depends on how much the fee is, right? And I know you're going to work out the details later, but I would encourage you to give those truckers and trucking companies as much notice as possible so that they can plan around that and they can be encouraged, and you can create the market for them, for the alternative fuel trucks and the cleaner trucks earlier rather than later. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and we would agree with that.
Okay. With regard to the costs, and just another comment, I've heard it twice in 12 hours, that, obviously it's going to be expensive. I mean, we can bicker over the cost of a fuel cell truck, and I really encourage you to go talk to a boss at US Hybrid on what those fuel cell trucks are going to cost. He gave me a very surprising number when I talked to him. So there are people, and some people in the audience, who you need to talk to about what those cost estimates are. We all agree it's going to be really expensive, and we know that. I mean, whether your cost estimates are accurate or not. But when you talk about those costs, will you please talk about the public health benefits from cleaning up the pollution? because when our staff looked at this issue for the AQMP, and when we calculated how much the benefits would be if we came into compliance with federal air quality standards, it was $172 billion of health benefits. So, you know, we need to characterize both the cost and the benefits, or else people only get one side of the picture. Yeah, and so
And
that's,
we received that comment. You heard it last night, and we had received it through the discussion document comments that we received as well. We did add information to our update, which does try to characterize that to a greater
saw that,
extent, and added it to the
I
economic
even wrote down the quote.
considerations as well.
It is clear that the CAP strategies will result in significant health cost savings in the economic considerations appendices to the document, which is great. I just think when you do the presentation, I know you're going to do more meetings like this, please, when you talk about the cost, add in too that there are cost savings involved. It's a fuller and more accurate picture, I think. Where am I in all this? I think a lot of this boils down, a lot of the problems that we confront, and that I know you'll hear from our staff about what they think they need to have, but a lot of those problems, I think, if they don't go away, they certainly are mitigated a lot by funding. So if we can get that money early on, there seems to be a lot of intent in the legislature and the governor's office right now to do that, and there may be other avenues of trying to get money to help pay for this. Have you sat down and figured out where your priorities are if incentive money does come in, and what would those priorities be?
Well, I think the priorities are related to the cost table that we put up there, but we have been doing that work. Some of it has been done through the discussions that we had that got initiated through that State Lands Commission Air Working Group, and some offline discussions we've had with you. We've had a lot of discussions with some of our local representatives, but identifying where our priorities are, and with a big focus on the cargo handling equipment and the trucks. The transition for the on-road trucks is the most expensive piece of what we're trying to do, and we need a lot of funding support to help us to overcome those challenges, specifically because we recognize the challenges for the drivers.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you, and the thing that is certainly a priority is getting the 2007, 2008, 2009 trucks off and out of the ports as quickly as possible. The older the truck, the more polluting it is generally. In doing that, we all recognize that we need to protect the drivers. And I think that we all failed in doing that as best as we could have last time around. I know that the drivers have been very successful, and when they file administrative appeals and go to court to challenge their non-employee status and everything, and it seems like a game of whack-a-mole that's going to go on forever. And maybe there isn't a single solution that our agency or yours can come up with to make that happen better. But certainly when we heard from the drivers last night, and when we read about that story in USA Today and have the guy actually show up last night, it reminds us of what a desperate situation it is for these independent owner-operators. And other than increasing efficiency and trying to get another turn in or another 2 turns in, and that could certainly increase the amount of money they're making, but are there other things that we can do to protect the drivers that you've been thinking about?
I think this has been a challenge since we first started on this process with the original Clean Trucks program, and this was something that Lisa could probably speak more to with the efforts that they engaged in the first time around with their program, and how far they continue to pursue that in court, and some of the restrictions that are related to that. I think that this is something we're very aware of, we're very concerned with. We need the entire trucking system to work for all of the participants in it, for us to be able to meet what we're trying to achieve with our air quality goals. And so I think that what we're trying to do is pursue the things that we can with the universal truck appointment system, trying to get as much funding, incentive support as we can. All of these will help, but this is a bigger challenge that it's not something that the port alone can solve, but we need to work together with everybody to see what we can do to address those concerns,
Yeah.
because they continue to be big concerns.
Lisa, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, this has been a huge concern both for the port and for both the cities since 2006, since the Port of Los Angeles tried to structure our program a little differently than the Port of Long Beach. As you know, we went all the way up to the Supreme Court with that. It's very difficult. We're going to look in developing our clean truck program this time. As we get into the nitty-gritty, we're going to be working with state, federal agencies. We're going to be working with our mayor to try to figure out what we can do, because it's heartbreaking.
And it really is important how we structure the incentive program in doing this. And thanks for those answers. Just last thing, with on-dock rail, I was reminded by Cynthia Marvin at the Air Resources Board that while it's a really good thing and we all want to maximize it, we want to make sure that those locomotives are clean locomotives. Because given how clean that newer technologies of trucks are becoming, dirty locomotives won't do us any good. So let's make sure that when we talk about on-dock rail, we also talk about clean locomotives.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Hill. Councilmember Mitchell?
Thank you, Chairman. Is this on?
Just get closer, yeah.
Just get in close, okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I think what's clear, first of all, is what a difficult problem we have in front of us. The costs are quite large. The logistics of the freight industry are very complicated. And the conclusion is that we all need to work together to get to the goal that we're all seeking and have the cleanest ports that we can have. I have a couple of questions. Is in the presentation, you indicated that the NOx, nitrogen oxides reduction has been 56%. And you indicate that by 2023 it'll be 59%. But I'm wondering, I mean, is that both of those a baseline of 2005?
That's correct.
Yes.
So you're anticipating only an additional 3% reduction in NOx between now and 2023?
So
Or-
the 59% that's indicated there is when we did the update to our Clean Air Action Plan in 2010, working with your staff and with the Air Resources Board and EPA staff, we identified San Pedro-based standards, is what we were calling them, emission reduction goals for 2014 and 2023. And so when we did that update in 2010, we identified that 59% would be the port's fair share of emission reductions for NOx, and we had put that in there as a goal for us to be able to achieve. I think what is indicated by the results that we've seen so far with our emissions inventory is we are well on the way towards meeting that goal, and we believe that we can exceed that through these efforts that we're doing with our update to the Clean Air Action Plan.
I see. So, but you haven't made any attempt in this Clean Air Action Plan to estimate a future goal. You're relying on a past goal that was established.
We're continuing to hold true to the goals that we established in the 2010 update. We are adopting new long-term emission reduction goals for greenhouse gases, which were not a part of the original plan. But the goals that we had established early on, we continue to move those forward.
All right. I am going to reflect the same concerns that my colleagues here have about the transition for your clean truck program. First of all, and I said this at the last Boards Committee meeting, 2035 is a target date that is pretty far out there to get to, the transitions that we're going to need in the South Coast to meet our NOx reductions. The other thing that was expressed, well, let me follow along that line of thought, because I'm wondering if you might consider in your transition plan to include a 2030 date. You skip from 2023 to 2035, at least in the outline I've seen in your plan. But 2030 is the date under SB 32 where GHG reductions have to occur as well. So you might consider including another date in there for transitioning our trucks over. The trucks, of course, are the biggest source of diesel particulate and NOx in the ports. And it's obviously one area on which the South Coast has focused. The other concern that was expressed here by both my colleagues here is that there isn't any plan in here to phase out certain trucks. I mean, the phase out is on an assumption that they won't want to pay the new fee. And I would encourage you to take a look at that and actually have included in your plan some phase out of say the older trucks, the ones that are older than 2010. The other thing I'm wondering is, and this is the problem that Dr. Liu has just focused on, is we have so many truckers in the ports that are small fleets. Do you know what percentage they are?
Percentage of small trucking companies?
We have in our drayage truck registry, we do have all of the licensed motor carriers, and we know how many trucks each of them have that are registered in our program, so we can provide that. I don't know the statistics off the top of my head.
Because one thing that really should happen to meet our air quality federal standards is that we need to get over to those near zero trucks as quickly as we can, and that we know that's going to be a certified truck in early 2018. And since it's very difficult for the small fleet owner who has only 1 to 3 trucks to get into that program, and I haven't seen it on paper, but perhaps you've been discussing it, are you discussing plans for larger fleets to turn over first with their cleaner trucks going to the small fleet owners?
I think that at this stage, we're looking for all opportunities to transition those trucks as quickly as possible. I think that for moving to zero emissions, we're looking at some of the larger fleets that have yards that are located closer to the ports, and looking at working with folks like Southern California Edison and DWP at installing charging infrastructure to support those fleets. So for those early pilot demonstrations, that's probably something that we'd be doing with some of the larger companies. But getting incentives for all of the trucks across the board, especially in the near term, to get to those near zero trucks as quickly as possible, I don't think that we're necessarily limiting who we're planning to target and work with. We want to work with anybody that is ready and prepared to work with us.
Yeah, and I think that is another issue. If all the incentive money goes to the big fleet owner, you kind of leave out the small truck owner as well. For your costs, are the costs premised on the cost of incentives to turn trucks over, or is it also? It's probably also infrastructure.
So the costs are the incremental costs above and beyond the regular turnover of the equipment. So these are the costs that it would take to get into those near zero or zero emission technologies. For the cargo handling equipment, we do have one of the line items that was on that table is a cost for the infrastructure to support the transition to electrification, specifically within the terminals. For the on-road trucks, we do not have a cost in there for regional infrastructure, and so the costs that are in there are specific to the vehicles themselves, but there will be additional expenses beyond that to support the build-out of the regional infrastructure for hydrogen fueling or electrification.
On the electrification issue, Port of LA works with their own Department of Water and Power, and Long Beach works with Edison. Could you just give me a brief description of what you're undertaking right now to meet the infrastructure needs?
We're currently partnering with LADWP. We work very closely with them. We're having monthly meetings specifically on this issue through our supply chain optimization working group. We're very lucky to have a sister agency in LADWP that's willing to work with us. In the past, they've been very willing to work with us on the rate structures for the high volume of power that we've been getting in. And we continue to work with them. There's In the long term, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We still have a very old power system at the Port of Los Angeles, and we're continuing to work with DWP to make sure that these systems are updated in order to be able to bring in the load that we will need if the port is moving forward with this much electrical power.
Okay, and with Edison?
With Edison, actually, one of our representatives from Edison is here today and could talk a little bit more about it as well. But we've been working very closely with them over the past couple years on looking at what the infrastructure needs would be, both in the terminals and then also discussing what our long-term plans are regionally to support on-road vehicles as well. We have a couple projects that are currently going through the CPUC approval process to help support the development of electrical infrastructure within a couple of our terminals to support demonstrations of electric cargo handling equipment, rubber tire gantry cranes, and yard tractors. That's a project that we were able to secure funding from the California Energy Commission for, and Southern California Edison, as a partner in the project, would be installing the infrastructure in a couple of the terminals to support that equipment. So we're hoping to get approval on the use of Southern California Edison's funds to support that project here in the next couple months. But that is really a starting point. We have a lot of other discussions with them about ways that we can work with them both in the terminals and throughout the region. And even as recently as earlier this week, we had a discussion talking about the goals of what we're trying to accomplish with the Clean Air Action Plan and how they can play a role in helping to install regional charging infrastructure, working with the companies that provide trucking services in the port and helping to identify who would be good candidates to start installing some of that infrastructure in the near term.
And what has been the response of your terminal operators to the Clean Air Action Plan? Are they cooperating with you, or what are you finding with respect to terminal operators?
There are also representatives of the terminal operators here in the audience, and so I don't necessarily want to speak for them, but they have provided comment letters expressing very strong concerns about the costs associated with what we're proposing to do and the costs associated with getting to zero emissions versus near zero emissions. There is a much greater incremental cost to get all the way to zero than there would be if we went to near zero. They're concerned about the economic competitiveness of the terminals that operate here locally, where they have to meet a different expectation and standard than any other ports anywhere else in the U.S. So there is a lot of concern about diversion of cargo if we raise costs here to a point that it would be more economically beneficial for the cargo to go to other ports. That's a balance that we're going to have to play as we go through this. Our desire is not to affect our economic competitiveness. It's not to divert cargo, but we recognize we have a need to reduce emissions here locally and to do that as soon as possible.
Also a concern about timelines. There's quite a lot of different kinds of cargo handling equipment on a different schedule. Some of them have prototypes. Other ones do not have prototypes for alt fuel or electric. So not all cargo handling equipment is created equal, so they're very concerned about having one date for everything, I guess.
Right. I did see one of your goals was to standardize or at least work on some standardization for infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad see you doing that. That's important, that since you're working across 2 ports and multiple terminals.
We've also been working with the agencies as well on that, and we do have some agreement working with the technology developers and the agencies and between the 2 ports with our electrical engineers. There has been a lot of work on that already, specifically for the yard tractors, and we're going through it now with the top picks as well. So we are making efforts towards that. And these demonstration projects that we're moving forward with now in the near term will help to continue to inform that as well.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Judy. Supervisor Ashley on the line. You have any questions, comments? The item before us? Okay, hearing none.
No comments. No comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. So with that, we'll now turn to public comment on this item. I believe we do not have any cards that were filled out.
We're going to do the...
Want to do the staff presentation
Yes.
first? Okay. that we're going to have, because they're separate items,
We
so.
can do, you're right, Councilman.
Okay.
We can do two separate items. We don't have the speaker cards. We can
Okay.
ask them.
So folks who would like to speak on the item, please line up in front of the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes. I will have the timer here, and 2 minutes to speak.
Okay, well, actually, what I'd like to do first of all is to pass out the actual emissions results from the staff. There's some, I mean, in other words, you guys know this, but you've not presented it in this way. So here's the situation.
Sir, speak to the microphone, please, so we can all hear you.
Give me one of these things here.
Thank you. If you can identify yourself for the record.
Is you guys just got it. This is the combined emissions from the Port and Long Beach and LA in their 2016 reports. So this is what's online. And you can see how the ocean-going vessels are killing us. The harbor craft is huge. Locomotives are huge. The cargo handling equipment is almost insignificant. And then the trucks are interesting, right? I mean, Judy Mitchell said that she thought that the trucks were the biggest thing. But as you can see, that the actual data from the scientists that did this report shows the diesel particulate matter for trucks is very small. The GHGs are huge. What this means is that we are in real trouble if we go to near zero trucks, because the GHGs are the same. Now you're going to hear, and I can comment later at the next item, about the fact that they are using renewable natural gas, and that's a fake and a scam. And do I have another minute or?
27 seconds.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Yeah, let's just address this issue of renewable natural gas. It comes from primarily landfills, and they're comparing it with the flaring, and that means that we could use that natural gas where it's most efficient, and the most efficient
Thank you, sir.
is fuel cells, not trucks.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Dr. Tom Williams with Sierra Club Transportation Committee. I've worked on a lot of ports and some railroad. But right now, the issue for me is, number one, what are the projections to the year 2035? And what are they based on? Containers or cargo or freight or goods? We don't know, because important. Are they loaded containers or unloaded containers, the empties? That's number one. Number two, the railroad. In the presentation, there was 2 times that they mentioned the word rail. But here's the basic. 22,000 trucks a day or 100 unit trains a day? Which do you want? What are the comparisons of emissions from 100 unit trains versus 22,000 trucks a day? Not bad. Okay, efficiency. How to make the port more efficient. One berth in Hong Kong, 1992, when I was there, moved 1 million TEUs. That is 500,000 40-foot containers. One berth. What's the efficiency of both the Port of LA and Long Beach? How many TEUs, 40 foots, can they move a day? And maybe you should get rid of those that are less than 100,000 TEUs a year. Make it more efficient. How to make it more efficient? Get more equipment on gantries. Number of gantries here versus elsewhere is quite low. And oh, by the way, there is one port down in Michoacan that has moved 6 million TEUs on 2 berths. No trucks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Jesse Marquez, lifetime Harbor Wilmington resident and executive director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment. We represent the public's best interest besides our community's best interest. And the thing that we want to ask, stop the BS. You have PhDs, you have masters, you have bachelor's degrees, AAs, or all these years of intellectual knowledge that you've gained. Don't stand up here or anywhere and tell us you don't know how many zero-emission trucks are out there, how many near zero-emission trucks are out there, because our organization contacted every frickin' manufacturer. And I can tell you exactly how many are commercially available as of June. Okay, it's not a hidden fact. Anyone can call them up and ask them or go to the website. And the fact of the matter is, there are right now 6 zero-emission trucks that you can buy. There are 4 zero-emission tractors, yard hustlers, that you can buy. There are 14 near zero-emission trucks you can buy, and there are 11 near zero-emission tractors you can buy. Now, you may not be able to buy it and walk out the door, but here's what they quoted for near zero: 30 to 90 days. For zero emission, it was 6 months to 12 months. Why don't you know these figures? We want to see them in the CAP plan. If you can create all these little tables and charts, you put that table and chart in the plan so there's complete 100% public disclosure. And you put out the prices, because they'll tell you the cost too. And if you calculated $14 billion, did you use the $800,000 mark for the Nikola One? Or did you use the $300,000 for the Orange EV, or for the BYD, or for the TransPower? Those are the facts and figures we want, because we've looked that up.
Thank you, Jesse. Next
Thank you.
speaker.
All right, good afternoon. First, I'd like to appreciate you allowing me to speak before you here today. My name is Matthew Ventimiglia, and I'm a concerned local resident. I'm not satisfied with the proposed changes to the Clean Air Action Plan. We need to include stronger air pollution cleanup measures and health protection measures. I believe, as Councilmember Buscaino mentioned, I would like to reemphasize the cost savings from a community health perspective. While I live a very active lifestyle, outdoors, cycling every day, I suffer from chronic colds and sinus infections. Medical bills are skyrocketing, and I probably pay about $50 to $100 a week on cold medicine, and I can't afford to pay all this. I've lived in my community for 33 years, and I've seen our families and neighbors' health decline because of these lenient policies that do not regard our health. We need zero emissions or near zero emissions no later than 2023. We need to get off diesel now or as soon as possible. I came here for clean air now, and I've heard about this renewable natural gas technology, and it sounds pretty damn good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Socia Rosales.
Good afternoon.
And I have lived, thank you. Hi, my name is Socia Rosales, and I have lived in this community for over 25 years. And I'm very concerned with the air pollution. Myself and my son, we suffer from severe asthma. And I'm really tired seeing my community getting sick every day. And I beg you to do something about it. We can't wait till 2035 and see more people getting sick. Why? Why do we have to wait so long? I mean, what is that needs to happen in this city so you guys realize that it's bad? I keep asking this doctor, why we keep getting sick? Is the smoke? Is it pollution in the air? I said, well, there's anything I can do? She said, no. So I'm taking my own hands on it, and I want to do something about it. And I want to ask you to please consider making the changes now. Don't wait. Don't wait for a crisis so the city will all be sick with asthma and allergies that we can no longer handle it. Please, take that in consideration and make the changes now. And I'm speaking for myself and the community, for the people that I know in my neighborhood. And I don't know much, I don't have much information, but I do know we get sick every day. So please do something about it. You're going to change right. Make sure you include health protection measures. I don't see you guys talking about that. Please include that on the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Mitchell Ventimiglia. I'm a concerned local resident. I've been local for 24 years. I'm not satisfied with the proposed changes to the Clean Air Action Plan. I feel they can have stronger cleanup measures, pollution cleanup measures, and health protection measures. I'm incredibly concerned because I'm a security guard and I stand outside all day. And when it's hot inside my house when I get home, I stay outside longer. I'm terrified if we don't do something a lot sooner, how are my children going to grow up? Or 20 years from now, by 2035, how are my grandchildren going to grow up? Every single one of us here after this is going to walk outside at some point and breathe that same air. And my question is, how long do you want to breathe it for? You, and I want to just mention a few facts. I'm not a mathematician, but on this chart it says 8 billion on the high end, but there's 7 billion less if we do near zero emissions. And I think one of you mentioned that it's 90% better than what we have now. That's actually doable by 2023. And I think, is that Biscayno? I don't have my glasses. He said basically the cost of not doing anything is over 150 billion. And I want to just close with having 90% of something by 2023 is better than having 100% of nothing by 2035. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Lone. I live in the Wilmington community, and I am not satisfied with the quality of air we live in. Both my mother and brother suffer from asthma and allergies, and I believe that by reducing the air pollution and greenhouse gases will allow them to live a healthier life. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Monroy, and I live in Wilmington, and it is very hard for my 5-year-old brother to be outside for long periods of time because he has asthma. Reducing air pollution and greenhouse gases will allow him to live a longer and healthier life in a cleaner environment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin McGuy. I'm with SoCal Gas. So there are no new standards in the plan, which is understandable. The goals of 2023 that you guys put forth in your Baywide standards in the previous cap are aggressive, especially when trying to keep pace and accommodate for growth. So there's not that much discussion on how these measures lead up or play into that standard. But the new standard for the greenhouse gases, which is 40% by 2030, there's not much discussion how these strategies get to that standard. Trucks account for 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions at the port, is by far the largest source. And I don't see how the strategies in place in the current cap help to meet that standard. I think that the port should do an assessment on the available technologies and how they can meet that standard. The state has a goal of 50% renewable energy by 2030. I'm not sure, but I think hybrid technology can beat that today. I'm certain that renewable natural gas can beat that today. So I think that the Clean Truck Program needs to take that goal into account and push for the early implementation of near zero technologies using renewable natural gas. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Roche. I'm with Clean Energy. We've heard a lot of calls last night, and they continue today to take action earlier. And Dr. Liu's statistic about a 30% non-compliance rate is shocking, but it's visible when you drive around Southern California. Here's the exciting opportunity. In 5 years from today, over the next 5 years, we can replace every dirty diesel truck in the port with clean available technology. We've written the Act Now plan to accomplish this, and what we need to do is make 3 changes to the draft cap. Number 1, require all new trucks registered in the port to meet the low NOx 0.02 standard, not just near zero, but 0.02 instead of 2014. We need to put the fee in place right away in 2018 so there's actual reason, as talked about earlier, to replace your truck before it times out. And number 3, following up on Kevin's comment, put in place as soon as possible, no later than 2020, a standard that requires greenhouse gas reductions by 40% or more. If we do this, we'll have trucks that are 99% cleaner on the road. This will take funding, but we can't wait for Sacramento. So the challenge for the ports and AQMD is to partner together, create a Kickstarter fund, and get 2,400 trucks on the road in 2018 and 2019. That sounds like a lot, but it's a down payment on the 16,000 trucks and will help the owner-operators purchase a truck. Think of it this way. A child born today will have better air to breathe when he or she goes to kindergarten in 5 years versus going through high school still breathing dirty air. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Ashley White. I'm with Clean Energy. I was part of the original port staff and consulting team that drafted and implemented the original Clean Air Action Plan and Clean Truck Program. I'm also the mom of a 5-year-old boy who suffers from severe asthma, who just this week had surgery to attempt to improve his breathing. I'm here today because I believe that we cannot wait 17 years for cleaner air. He cannot wait. We must strive for early action, and we must do so in a responsible manner. Funding the CAP will be no small feat, $14 billion. We do not have the financial resources to chase every shiny new object. We also have a responsibility to spend the money wisely and should only fund those technologies that are commercially available, operationally viable, and cost-effective. Natural gas vehicles produce 99% less NOx emissions than their diesel counterparts. Natural gas vehicles running on renewable natural gas produce 70% less greenhouse gas emissions than diesel and are as clean or cleaner than the current grid. An electric vehicle powered by, or otherwise called an elsewhere emission vehicle, powered by a fully renewable grid that doesn't exist today, would only achieve an additional 1% benefit in NOx and potentially no impact in GHG for more than double the price. And that doesn't include the cost of infrastructure. RNG is available today seamlessly in the existing natural gas and fueling network that has been built up over the last 10 years since the original Clean Truck Program. Additionally, by focusing on cost effectiveness, not just for the Clean Truck Program, but for the entire CAP, we can ensure port competitiveness. Our coalition has developed the AQMD plan, which allows for the ports to continue to grow and capture market share without being burdened by excessive costs. The AQMD plan saves the trucking industry alone an estimated $800 million and is 26% more cost-effective than the current Clean Air Action Plan draft, all while achieving immediate critical emissions reductions. And with all due respect to some others in this audience, I was the plant manager for an anaerobic digester here in LA, and I can assure you that RNG is real and available.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, welcome.
My name is Shola Boucheri, and I'm a local resident. I'd like to applaud the sustainable efforts being made by CAP, the renewable energy companies, and the air quality management to make a difference in the world to give us clean air. However, the proposed timeline of these eco-benefits is not a reality for those who need clean air now. Southern California, being a focal point of pollution and marine degradation, we need to get the diesel trucks off the road now. We need to put chips on renewable energy. Our health and the health of the environment needs to be put first before making a profit, which means if other American work needs to slow so this campaign can be given the proper respect, then the focus needs to be there to make this emergency a reality. Clean air is a necessity and a right to all of Earth's inhabitants. I understand you have proposed a study to complete by 2018 to initiate near zero emission trucks onto the road. I hear that 2023, any new trucks entering the service must be near zero emissions. And your goal is for no emissions by 2035. Is it 2035? Thanks. But I believe the goals need to achieve, need to be met faster. They do not go far enough or fast enough. Perhaps making more contacts or inquiring about the technologies will be more beneficial, like expanding a little bit, inquiring about all of them, getting everybody together, because this is something that's really important. Our air, our Earth is suffering. It's not just people. It's not an anthropocentric thing. It's something that's happening to everybody. I mean, everything, all of Earth. And I think that this issue is extremely important, and to wait until 35 is just way too far.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Hi there, I'm William Coons. I'm a resident of the city of Carson, and as an example of what trucks are causing, I live 2 blocks from Wilmington, and the trucks constantly go north and south on this street, and the diesel particulates are especially bad on this Wilmington street. My son also goes to school. Well, he was going on a bus to Harbor Teacher Prep, and he would especially smell these trucks and so forth. So we really want to get rid of diesel trucks, really. there's almost no way you can get rid of the odor and also the particulate matter. So I'm here to say I think zero emission is, I'm a former engineer. I believe from what I've read, zero emission is possible. In fact, it's available there. The technology is here now. So let's do it now. Let's not wait and wait and wait till this 2035. Let's do it by 5-6 years. That's 2023. That's the date we've looked at. That's a good date. Let's go for zero emissions, and if we can't get there, let's go for near zero emissions. We can do it, so let's do it. The funding, if you can't get it from the state and your own local stuff, I know it's $8 to $14 billion. If you can't get it, let's charge the shipper some. Let's ask them to come in, but let's get and do it, and let's do this zero emissions or near zero emissions by 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Shanker. I'm here with BYD. I think broadly speaking, we're thrilled to see this move towards near zero, and in particular zero emissions. And we really want to say that I think the challenge we see is the actionable efforts to get there. Moving back the fee by a few years, we think is a challenge. Putting that investment, starting that investment program now, and really thinking about how we're going to create investments that drive down those costs for the future now is incredibly critical. What we've seen is that in the zero emission marketplace, we've had rapid commercialization, and these prices have dropped much faster, and the timelines have been much more improved over what we even expected to see a year ago. Our experience in the marketplace entering the electric bus market 6 years ago, we've now deployed 20,000 buses worldwide. We have 120 deployed in the US, another 320 on order, and over 300 options. We've seen prices drop by $325,000 in that time per bus. In the last 2 years, when we launched our electric truck line, which depends on that same core technology, our prices have gone down by $50,000 per yard hostler and per truck. We have over 1,000 deployments already globally. We have 140 on order. We are going to have 70 delivered by the end of this year, and that includes the first 5 going to be here in the port complex itself by the end of September. This is a really rapid change. We have top picks coming out. We have yard hustlers. These are things that really can transform what our port and communities look like. And we just want to make sure that these investments are really in place to help drive down those prices even sooner than possible. We believe that this technology is ready for large-scale deployment, and we don't need to wait. Thank you.
Ma'am, if you can just hold on, one of my, Mr. Liu has a question.
Yes, old friend. Good to see you over at BYD. Last week, Stella Lee, the boss of bosses here in North America, was at the Silomar conference. I got to spend some time talking with her about that. And your comments just now reminded me that at one point BYD released what their cost estimates and over time and what the products are. Is it possible that you guys and the other manufacturers in the room could provide us updated information about that? Because I know that it changes all the time, but it would be really helpful, releasing publicly what you can release publicly so that we have as much updated and public information as possible.
Certainly, and I think we can say that we've been seeing 8% year over year battery density improvements and commensurate price improvements over the last several years. We project that will improve in the future. We can certainly give you where the price drops have come on our bus products, on our yard hostler and our truck products, even in the last 2 years. We have some estimates about what that might look like in the future. So whatever we can provide, we're happy to share.
Thank you. And next speaker, welcome.
So, Thomas Yelenich with PMSA. Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of things I would like to comment on. First, I would like to clarify something on growth. We've heard about how we're growing and we're seeing press releases on how the ports are growing. That is not true. The ports have had a decade of no growth, and we've had, we've had
Take them off the knees.
That's why you take it out.
We've had, I hope I'm getting some of my time back.
Time is held. I just held your time, Thomas.
So we've had a decade of no growth, and we've lost market share over that decade. In fact, 2017 will be the first year as a gateway, we exceed our pre-recession peaks. That's a big deal, to take over a decade for us to pop our heads back from our 2006 levels. And we need to be focused on that growth, because that growth and market share is what's going to pay for these improvements. Second, on the other handout I gave you, you can see, and I quote what the Sierra Club mentioned, cargo handling equipment emissions contributions to the region are insignificant. They make up far less than 1%, yet by our estimates, it's $18 billion to move to zero emissions. Even if you take the port's estimates, it's $4 billion. Either way, it's a lot of money to go after a fraction of those costs. And the technology simply does not exist. The technology that's examined in the CAP is not available today. We have spent a decade trying to demonstrate the technology. I have no doubt it will get there, but it's not available today, and we do not know when it will become available. Finally, the last thing I'd ask you to consider is the port's cost for this plan is $14 billion. That's roughly pretty close to what AQMD estimates is necessary to close the black box. But that's for the entire region. This plan essentially doubles the amount of funding that's necessary for this region to reach attainment without really providing any additional benefits, because it's focused solely on electrification and not focused on technologies that are available today to achieve the emission reductions we know we can achieve. And so that places a huge burden on this region in terms of going after funding and all the need we have. And Joe Liu in particular, you were skeptical of the ability to pull all those funds. We've essentially doubled our need now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like our final speaker. Good afternoon.
I'm fun. I used to run a music rehearsal studio, it's fine. Good afternoon. My name is Jake Filipovich, and I am a concerned resident of San Pedro. I'm not satisfied with proposal changes to CAP. They must include stronger air pollution cleanup and health protection measures. I'm incredibly worried with it because I moved to San Pedro about 4.5 years ago from Redondo because it was one of the last coastal affordable communities left. I fell in love with it. Unfortunately, since moving to San Pedro, my wife's health, as far as her asthma and allergies, have made it so debilitating that she can barely get out of bed some days. We are guaranteed life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Therefore, clean air is a human right. We are being deprived of this right, and this needs to change now. With all the technologies and advancements in zero emission and non-zero emission or near zero emission vehicles, 2035 is way too far off. It is just kicking the can down the road, so there is no reason to achieve near zero emissions by 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just kidding on the last speaker. Looks like we have a couple more. Good afternoon, Jim.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jim Kennedy. I'm a resident of Los Angeles in the South Bay. I know Councilmember Buscaino knows that anywhere you live in the LA area, you're affected by the diesel trucks that come out of this port, because recently the Department of Building and Safety instituted that any new residents along highways, freeways, have to have clean air filters. So apparently someone is going to be bearing the cost. It's about who's going to do that. I just want to commend the ports of being probably the premier group throughout the world on implementing clean technology. And a lot of it comes from staff work, but it comes also from something bigger. It comes from the fact that California is different. We demand more, and that comes from the community people that you've heard today. But I really wanted to get up here today to commend Commissioner Mitchell. In your review of the CAP, just right here, you found a gaping hole that they don't have a standard yet for 2030, that SB 32 is going to have. And I hope the staff also looks at the other issues that are missing. Commissioner Liu brought up that there's an assumption on the clean truck plan of how we're going to turn over. It's not just about getting rid of dirty trucks. It's really going to have to be about getting rid of diesel trucks. Because even with going to what anybody wants to define as clean diesel, it's still going to be probably out of compliance with AQMD and the California Air Resources Board is going to institute for 2023. Getting my dates all mixed up. So there's going to be a cost, there's going to be a burden, there's going to be disruption. So why don't we do it the right way? Why don't we do as much as we can to get to zero emissions with electric vehicles as they're available, but also look at the alternative technologies for near zero, which will have great reductions, that will have a great impact for our health. So we're all here because we want to support bearing the cost, but we don't want to continue the health risk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Niedros. I'm with GNA. I'm here on my own behalf, not representing a multitude of clients that we work with in the clean technology space. As most folks may know, we have spent the last 24 years helping to put thousands of clean trucks on the road to help clean the air. It's something that we're passionate about, something that we understand a lot about, and we have a lot of facts and data about this. AQMD has been a tremendous partner, a global leader in this effort to put clean technology on the road to help clean the air. AQMD has also been a true global leader in the science of air quality. And I urge you, and I really thank you for having this committee meeting, because I think it's important that we use the science and we use data, and that the AQMD continue to show leadership in this area. We've heard here today, we see it on social media, we're going to hear more of it, I'm sure, in the next presentations. We hear things that renewable natural gas is a marketing gimmick. It's actually not true. We hear that near zero trucks are not clean. They're as dirty as diesel. We shouldn't do that. We know that you all know that this is factually incorrect. This is false news. This is ignoring the science of air quality. As I said last night, I'll say here today, in my opinion, we already have one too many people in this world that ignores the science, uses fake news and social media to set environmental policy. We shouldn't get trapped in doing that here. We need the AQMD to help settle the debate, and that's why I wanted to be last. I know that the next presentation is the AQMD staff, and I heard what Jesse said. There's a lot of very, very smart people at the AQMD that know this better than anyone. We need to use that to put the facts on the table and have an informed debate. We need to understand that near zero is 4 times cleaner than an average light-duty automobile on the lot today, a 2017 car. That is incredible when we think about hauling 80,000 pounds of freight. We need the AQMD to continue to affirm that RNG is effective to capture methane that's being vented and flared to the atmosphere, a potent GHG pollutant, and using that to displace diesel. That does matter. That does have impact. So we need all of the above. I appreciate Becca's comments. We need all near zero, zero, and more to be as successful as we could ever possibly dream of to get to clean air, and we hope that you continue to help us fight that fight.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Todd Campbell. I'm with Clean Energy, and I want to thank each of you for addressing this very important topic for the San Pedro Bay. And as being a South Bay resident, it's particularly important to me and my child as well, my 5-year-old who has a respirator sometimes that he has to use to cure some of his breathing issues. The plan clearly should be adopting the cleanest technologies available today, and we have some very impressive technologies that can address the #1 source of pollution, which is heavy-duty trucks. I wanted to point out a number of things in the proposal today that I think need a further consideration. Why in 2018 would we be requiring model year 2014 or newer trucks when we have near zero emission trucks today? The plan also says that we're going to look in 2023 at whatever the Air Resources Board may adopt in terms of a manufacturing standard. We already have an optional low NOx standard that exists today. And as many of the people who came up and testified, they want zero, if not near zero. So why not adopt the 0.02 gram standard, which is a 90% reduction? And by the way, in-use emissions, when they're tested at UC Riverside, are showing these trucks to run 99% lower in emissions than the cleanest diesel on the road. I think up until 2023, not only should you waive registration fees for zero emission trucks, you should extend that to near zero emission trucks. We should be doing everything we can to bring all clean technologies forward. And in terms of raising funding, there is $1.5 billion in cap and trade funds being debated today up in Sacramento. we should have every one of us and all our representatives going after these funds to bring these funds to the truckers who desperately need subsidies and help to get into these clean vehicles. Also, I would like to say that there should be some inclusion of a renewable standard so that we could also address greenhouse gas emissions in this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chris Shimoda, California Trucking Association. Just wanted to add two pieces of information to the discussion here, just points of clarification. To back up Mr. Stewart's assessment, if you do look at the port's current emissions inventory, trucks are the smallest source of diesel particulate matter in the inventory. So just wanted to put that on the table. Common misperception that we are still the largest source for DPM. This is thanks to the advent of something called the diesel particulate filter, which is 99.9% effective in cleaning up diesel particulate matter for trucks. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification. And then also, with regards to the figure Mr. Liu cited with the 30% noncompliance rate, that is a statistic from the statewide truck and bus rule. There was actually a similar study done for the ports that found that truckers were 100% compliant with the rules in the port, so I did want to make that clarification. And also, the industry does support making sure that there is a level playing field. The people who have complied with these rules have spent a lot of money, and that's why actually the CTA did support legislation this year that will require proof of compliance with the truck and bus rule as part of registering with the DMV, and that's going to occur in 2020. So just want to make those two comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think our last speaker.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thomas Lawson, California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. I provided similar comments last night at the pork workshop, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in Sacramento, kind of echo a little bit of Todd's points, but most of this meeting I've been over sitting in my chair, getting emails on a lot of activity happening back in Sacramento, and now's the time. The legislature is looking to wrap up their spending plan on cap and trade between now and a little bit after Labor Day. September 15th is when the session is over. My caution to you guys is that right now there is a robust discussion happening about mobile sources. We have to get people to focus on heavy-duty trucks and buses. If we don't, a lot of that money will be going to light duty. And one of my issues over the last 10 years dealing with AB 32 is light duty has gotten a lot of focus. And I think that the heavy-duty truck sector has kind of been the odd man left out. And so to build on this momentum, and it started with Monday, there was a press conference, and Senator Lara, Skinner, Pan, Wachowski, and Bradford were all there. They had a demonstration of some clean trucks, included natural gas vehicles, included hydrogen buses, included electric buses. But what they were trying to show was what was necessary to get this heavy-duty truck sector to the next level to make it cleaner. And if we don't, as collectively we, people who care about air quality in this region, are not in front of them now, today, as soon as I'm done, I'm catching a flight back to Sacramento, we're gonna miss a window of opportunity because they're not gonna have this discussion again until this time next year. And that would be, I think, a very, very big mistake. So I encourage you to talk with your representatives who represent the ports and the LA delegation, as well as the leadership, to make sure that this is part of it and that we don't siphon all this money to light duty. My second point, my last point is, I haven't heard any discussion about VW. And I would encourage everyone here to lobby the governor to get him to designate an agency so that we can start to work on projects to mitigate NOx. There's $400 million there where we can build projects. And I think some of the things we're talking about here today to help support that plan would help do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. My name is Dwight Hansen, and I work for Momentum Fuel Technologies. It's a division of Rush Truck Centers. They're the largest truck centers in the United States, 142 locations. I've been in transportation since I got out of the Marine Corps in 1993. I still have a commercial driver's license. I worked for Cummins for 11 years. I worked for a fueling provider. I worked for a cylinder manufacturer, and now I'm working for a vehicle integrator. So I like to say I have the most holistic approach and view of natural gas and trucking and transportation of anybody. I work for the largest diesel engine manufacturer in the United States, And Cummins would not be behind natural gas in these natural gas engines if they didn't think they were viable and they were available and you could get them today. So I would encourage the board to move forward with the plan and try to do technologies that are available today, like the near zero 12-liter engine. I just looked at it today at the Clean Energy Station right over here. It's sitting there. They're testing it in use today. And so I'm in sales. I have a catchy sales saying that I like to say all the time, but I think it's very true. And it's everybody wants to be green, but we have to be green financially first. And I think doing the near zero and the engines and technology we have available today from Cummins Westport is the way to go. So I would encourage the board to move forward quickly with that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the item before us? Okay, thank you so much for your presence and your comments. So this item before us, colleagues, item number 1 is an informational item. No action is required. And with that, we will now turn to item number 2 on the agenda.
Great, thank you very much. So I think a lot of really good feedback we've heard a lot of really good feedback so far. I think with that, I'll try to shorten my presentation because I think a lot of it's already been said. There are a few points we'd like to bring up from our review of the CAP, and this is sort of our first take on reviewing the CAP. We're still taking a look at it, still talking to the ports a lot. We've had some very many very productive conversations with the ports. Those continue, and we expect those will continue. And we're also reaching out to a lot of stakeholders to get their thoughts in detail. But we wanted to walk through a few of our early thoughts here and go through that. So I'm just going to kind of there's about 8 slides here on background. I want to get through most of them to kind of skip them because we've heard them all already, but I do want to focus on a few points. One here, we've heard a little bit about growth forecasts and growth at the ports. What this chart is showing, the red line shows the actual TEU counts at the ports since the year 2000. We see rapid growth during the early 2000s as globalization was taking hold. You see the recession, a very clear dip there, and then very slow growth ever since that time period, roughly mimicking GDP growth. The blue lines, the top ones, show growth forecasts, and that there was an early growth forecast in 2007. And part of the reason I want to bring this up is that the 59% target that was set by the ports for NOx was based off of that top growth curve. Part of this is that maybe you can get some reductions with growth by having all that growth. You have extra economic activity, you can turn over equipment, but there's also a lot more activity. So that was the assumption when that 59% target was set. It was revised, the sort of bolder blue line in the middle, right after the recession. And then there's been a more recent forecast, so you see all those dashed lines there. The most recent forecast shows a high, medium, low growth scenario, and we're still trying to figure out which one it's going to be. We do know that there's the mayor's declarations on the CAP. I don't think I need to review that at this point. There are a number of activities that are going on. Obviously, we had our 2012 AQMP. We had the backstop rule that we went through that process for a while. We now have the 2016 AQMP. There's the mobile source strategy from the state, as well as mobile source activities here at the district. The chart on the bottom shows nitrogen oxides in the base year of 2012 from the AQMP, and the top of the next two from 2023 and 2031 shows what existing regulations will get us. We see significant reductions occurring from existing regulations, such as the truck and bus rule, which will require all trucks to be 2010 standard by 2023, including here at the ports, but we know we need a lot more beyond that. 45% reduction above that by 2023 and 55% by 2031. And we want to highlight this here because 2023 in particular is right around the corner. It's why everybody's talking about it. It's because this is our attainment goal for ozone. The CARB resolution addressed at berth and cargo handling equipment. I think we've talked about that already, but it is something that is going on at the same time that we're looking at the CAP. Some other activities that are going on out there. There's a Sustainable Freight Action Plan happening at the state. There's the California Freight Mobility Plan. There's SB1. There's been a lot of talk about that. I don't need to focus on the details here. Just there's a lot of activity happening right now. Just thinking about all the meetings that are going on. For most of these folks in the room, I've seen them 2, 3, 4 times this week already. Everybody's having all these meetings. There's a lot of activity going on. Let's try this again here. Staff did have some comments on the original discussion draft of the cap that was released in November. We submitted our comments earlier this year. There's really kind of boils down to two main points. One was on the emission reduction strategy and one was on the emission reduction targets. Really, we wanted more specifics on the strategy with interim milestones. And secondly, on the targets, we thought that there should be more focus on the targets. And that was really the bulk of our comments were based on that in this first go round. Now I want to go through what is our initial take on the cap right now. And first and foremost, you're hearing a lot of comments here from a lot of diverse stakeholders, right? And the ports are in a very challenging position. They have a lot of really diverse viewpoints that they're trying to meet. A top level thing we should say is that the proposed measures in the cap, they are going to provide a NOx reduction, right? And doing something with this cap will be better than doing nothing. So that's a top level thing that we can say. And there's also a lot of very positive sort of facilitating measures that are probably hard to assign emission reductions to, like the truck appointment system, infrastructure. Some of those things are hard to actually tie emission reductions to, but they're very positive facilitating measures. So those are all good. That said, we do have some concerns with what we've seen so far. One of the main things is really when we look at this 2023 target, how much is in the cap that's actually going to help us get to this 2023 target? And I'll walk through that in some detail on some of these next slides. There has been some discussion about, so far already today, what the emissions are through time. What this graph is showing is from the port's own emission inventories, what the NOx emissions have been since 2005. We see that they're very high early on with a very rapid reduction through about 2010, 2011 timeframe. And since that time, some reduction, not a whole lot, say since 2012, are roughly flat. We see the 59% target way off there on the right for 2023. This is the only commitment that we see in the current cap for a NOx reduction. There are discussions of many mechanisms on differential rate structures and that sort of thing, but actual commitments, that yellow dot is the only commitment that we see in the current version of the cap. I wanted to put this in a little bit of context as far as what does this look like relative to total emissions in the air basin. So what this is showing is, again, these similar to that chart that I showed a little bit earlier, what are the total nitrogen oxide emissions in the AQMD, and we see on the left there is 2005, emissions a little bit above 1,000 tons a day, and we see at that time the ports were roughly 9% of our inventory. And as we go through time to 2012, about the same, about 8%. When we look forward to 2023, this is again just with existing regulations. We see that there's a large reduction in NOx that's continuing, but if the ports only meet that 59% target, if that's all that they're going to meet, then their relative proportion becomes much greater, right? It's now 13% of what our emissions are throughout the entire district. And then if we look in addition at our carrying capacity, and what our carrying capacity is how much nitrogen oxides we can emit in the basin and actually attain air quality standards, right? So that's our carrying capacity. And we see, again, if there's only a 59% reduction, if that's the target that's met, the ports now become a little bit more than a quarter of our carrying capacity. So the relative proportion of the port's contribution to NOx is increasing through time if 59% is all that's going to happen. When we look at the emissions inventory, we've heard some comments on this already. This is the 2015 inventory. The 2016 just came out. It's roughly the same proportions here. We see vessels are the largest fraction, right? Over half of the NOx comes from ocean-going vessels, about 20% from trucks, and the remainder on those other sources. But if we look on the left here at, well, the emission reduction appendix that was included with the cap, looks at, well, what are the emission reductions by 2025? It says 2024, it's roughly December 31st, 2024, so we can say by 2025. And we see that there's, depending on the strategies that are employed, trucks might get a 74 to 91% reduction by 2025. By 2023, it would be less, unspecified, but less. Cargo handling equipment, about a 10% reduction. By 2023, something less, maybe 8%. And on these other sources, unknown if any emission reductions by 2023. And when we look at this pie chart and we say, well, we need more emission reductions, it's hard to see where we're going to be getting this out of this cap right now, at least as it's stated so far. If we look specifically at some of the measures, when we look at the truck measures, a lot is really riding on this differential rate structure, and Dr. Liu, you mentioned a lot of the same kind of thoughts that we've noticed so far. Is it's all the rate. What is the rate going to be? If it's $1 a year, that doesn't really change behavior. If it's $100,000 a year, well, that's effectively a ban. There's a whole lot of gray area in between there. I think what we're really trying to look at is how is that rate going to be determined? What is the target? What are they trying to do for turnover? Are they aiming for a range of 25% turnover, 50% turnover, 75%? How does that determine? When is that decision actually going to be made? What is the criteria to make that decision? How will it be revised and revisited if the rate is too effective or not effective enough? And so I think a lot of those details, if they're not going to set those targets in the cap, the process can be, a little more detail can be provided in that process. We've heard a lot about the timing of the rate structure. I'm not going to repeat that here, but starting in 2023 might not do enough to get the reductions that we need in 2023. There are some assumptions about fleet turnover that are in their emission reduction calculations. We have some questions about that. We're continuing to work with the ports on it. The basics of it are that they assume that there's a lot of fleet turnover that's going on, that's happened in the past, and that will continue into the future. The rate is really going to determine a lot of that turnover. And so that's one thing we're trying to work through. Sorry. When we look at the ocean-going vessels, again, this is about half of the NOx emissions. One of the appendices includes a description of what is expected for the coming decades for different vessels coming in. And I want to first highlight that middle bar chart there showing Tier 1, 2, and 3, the green chart, and that these are the emission standards set by the International Maritime Organization, the IMO. They're the ones that actually set the standards, not EPA, not CARB, not us. So these standards are set of the NOx and grams per kilowatt hour for these engines, and these are very, very large pieces of equipment on these ships. And we see that, okay, Tier 3 looks like a fairly significant reduction beyond Tier 2 and Tier 1, but the timing of this is really important. And so if we look at this bottom bar chart in blue, and we see that through time, from 2005 through 2016, this shows how many keels were laid for shipbuilders and how many ships are ready to go. And we see that there's this very large spike in 2015 of roughly 1,200 keels were laid in 2015. And that's because they can just do the Tier 2. So bringing Tier 3 in is not really clear how that's going to happen. So this is a really significant challenge. And all this data is coming from the port's appendices. So this is really a challenge. The other thing that we do see, though, is that the differential rate structure that's proposed for vessels doesn't even start until 2025. And given that this is by far the largest source of NOx emissions, it's hard to see how there's much benefit here for ships in transit for our attainment goals. Continuing with a couple other measures when it comes to ocean-going vessels, the at-berth controls. It appears that the measure as proposed right now is a little unspecified how to advance controls beyond what CARB is looking to do, and CARB is looking to get up to 100% compliance with at-berth by 2030. It's not that that's not a good goal, but we also have the 2023 interim target, and so what is it that the ports are going to do to advance by 7 years that target? And it's not clear what CARB's path is going to be for 2023 as they're still developing their regulation. So a little bit more definition in this would be helpful. When we also look at the vessel speed reduction program, it's hard to know how effective that will be when it comes to getting emission reductions. What's the timing? What's the effectiveness? What's the target they're trying to get at? If they're already at 90% compliance within 20 miles and 80% within 40, are we getting marginal benefit there, or are we actually getting maybe a lot? What is it? Again, what's the process for setting the target? How is that revisited? Very similar to the truck program. I just want to very briefly touch on SIP credit. This is State Implementation Plan credit. There are many potential mechanisms to try to get SIP credit. This has been a big topic of discussion between the ports and our agency through the years, in particular through the last backstop effort and continuing now. These can include indirect source rules, credit generation rules, potentially through contracts, through MOUs, et cetera. There's a lot of different mechanisms in place. One mechanism we had talked about potentially is maybe some sort of overarching memorandum of understanding on the cap between our agency and the ports. It's hard to see how that path is open to us with the way the cap is currently written. There's a number of integrity elements we need to meet for EPA, and those don't appear to be defined enough in the cap as currently written. It doesn't mean that later actions couldn't get there, but this, as currently written, it's hard to see how that pathway would work. There's some miscellaneous comments or some miscellaneous observations that we have. One is that there's a proposal to implement much of the cap through lease agreements. One of the things we're trying to get a handle on is what is the schedule of leases. These leases typically are very long-term, 20 years plus is not unheard of and it's probably common. And so if there's not many leases coming up in the next 10, 15 years, it's hard to know, how effective this is going to be. So we want to just get an understanding of that. And it's also not clear that leases can always be the most effective implementation tool. We've seen with China shipping that there are some real challenges when it comes to implementing leases and all the mitigation measures that are put into these leases. And leases are also negotiated agreements. They're one-off negotiated agreements. And there could be some competitiveness issues if one terminal operator decides to do more. Is that really the same logic and rationale that's going to happen in the next lease agreement? And so it's not clear that this is always going to be the best implementation tool. It certainly does have some effect, but there are some challenges with it. We did note, too, that the CAP is proposing to potentially relax its cancer risk threshold for individual projects. And part of this is, as they state, is related to the recent updates from the State Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment on their new cancer risk methodologies for how to calculate cancer risk. Those, as a reminder, at the same emissions level have increased cancer risk by a factor of 3 by looking at how we calculate cancer risk in a different way. And so the ports and the CAP say that they're considering evaluating this threshold on a case-by-case basis. But the current CAP from 2010 has a 10 per million threshold, which is equal to the AQMD sequence significance threshold. We also noted that there's not really any measures when it comes to locomotives and not a whole lot of definition on any measures for cargo handling equipment or harbor craft by 2023. Again, focusing on this 2023 date, and for 3 of their emission sources, there's really just not a whole lot that we can hang our hat on. The costs obviously are really critical, really important. We just note that they use some slightly different methodologies than what we use in the AQMP. It's not one is right, one is wrong. It's different, so it's hard to do apples to apples. But so there are some differences there. I think one of the things that we are wanting to pursue and think about is there's the incentives and how do we get a lot of incentives to try to bring this equipment in, but also how do we reduce costs? And I think that's something we're going to have to be focusing on as well. We didn't see a lot of that in this document, and it's something that we're trying to explore as staff. How do you actually reduce costs, especially when we start to look at this at scale? It's not like we're trying to buy 10 or 20 pieces of equipment. It's thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment. So how do we reduce those costs? For the next steps, so we do plan to continue to meet with the ports and various stakeholders. This SIP credit is something that we're going to have to really pursue. It's an important piece when it comes to attainment. Comments are due by September 18th, and we are interested to hear comments, obviously, from the board and from the public, and we'll continue to keep reviewing the CAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Any other comments from staff? Okay, colleagues, any questions, comments on the item before us? Mr. Robinson.
I just have a brief one. I'm curious how much discussion you've had with the ports with respect to your concerns about the integrity elements, because the SIP credit is really where the main focus is for us. So what level of understanding do they have about our concerns? And I'm guessing this could be a very long answer, so just what you have right now, and then maybe we can talk about it a little bit more later.
I'll say that actually we've had a lot of very detailed conversations, technical staff, legal staff, many conversations at length, and those continue. I think a lot of the focus, as I showed before, there's sort of the 4 elements. A lot of the focus has been on enforceability. How was something enforced? And enforceability has a lot into the meaning of it. But I think some of the things that we're looking at, some of the other issues that we have to deal with are surplus. If you have a clean truck going to the port, is that replacing a dirty truck that's operating elsewhere in the district? How do we track that? How do we think about that? So there's a lot of details. I don't really, and we could go into a lot of the details here, but I think that's a very long discussion. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of focus at the agency level, agency to agency level on this issue. And there's been some very productive discussions. I think they understand our concerns on this. And we understand some of their concerns too. I don't know that we have a very clear path forward, but there's a lot more possibilities, I think, today than we thought there might have been maybe even just a couple years ago.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because I know the overarching MOU is probably where, there's a lot of focus from their perspective. And so, even if there's a narrow path forward with something like that, then I think that it's definitely worth the time to focus on. But if it seems like we'd be at an impasse, then I think that we need to be continuing to have some very serious discussions. So, thanks.
Yeah. Dr. Liu?
Thank you. First of all, I just kind of became aware through an email exchange that this particular facility was on a list of boycott and labor disputes list, and we might have dissuaded some members of the public who are going to come from coming to this location. So in the future, I think we need to take that into consideration. So I just want to start off by saying that. Didn't have a chance to say it to anyone earlier. With SB1 and the requirements under that, it appears to me that there could be differing interpretations if you were to actually outright ban trucks from accessing the ports and whether or not that would violate it. But when I read SB1, there was a provision in there that provided an exemption for incentive programs, and they specifically mentioned a gate access incentive program. But I also believe that that exemption was more broadly worded than that, and other incentive programs like the ports are proposing for 2023 could actually happen sooner. Does staff agree, and would that be one mechanism to get earlier reductions to get us toward our attainment goals at a little faster pace?
Well, I think from a policy perspective, that's one of the things we'd like to see, is because one of the questions we have is, are the fees that they're proposing, whatever they are in 2023, enough to get some change to happen before that? Because people will be buying trucks before 2023 in anticipation of the fee. You'd think they'd buy the truck that might save them a little money, but the assumptions in the cap about how much fleet turnover that would bring about is one of the questions we have. So the earlier those fees can kick in, probably the more comfortable we can get with their turnover assumptions. But on the legal side, I would defer to
Counsel.
Barbara.
Maybe for a little weak person like me. So, Dr. Liu, you're right. There is a specific exemption in SB1 for what's described as voluntary incentive and grant programs, including but not limited to those that give preferential access to a facility, to a particular vehicle or class of vehicles. So the very type of incentive in terms of a preferential fee structure, which is proposed to be implemented for trucks in 2023 and for ocean-going vessels in 2025, I see no reason why it couldn't be implemented in 2018. We do have a optional standard for the ultra-low NOx trucks, which trucks can meet. There are some zero-emission trucks that could benefit from the fee, and there is the IMO standard for trucks, for marine vessels built after 2016. And you saw that there's been a great attempt to evade that requirement, but if people find it economically beneficial, then they would stop evading it and start meeting it, hopefully.
Thank you. And what you lack in the muscle to pick up these mics, you more than make up for in legal prowess, believe me.
Thank you.
My last question is this lease issue and the kind of lease whack-a-mole approach that we might be stuck doing. I think it would be helpful for us to have more data about what the lease situation is. There's only a certain number of terminals, and they do have actual leases in place, so we should be able to collect data on when those leases come up and when they're planning. Some are being planned to be amended sooner. So whatever information you guys can provide on that, it would give us more information on whether or not it's a viable approach. Also, if you do have other implementation tools that you think might work, perhaps an incentive program that is implemented earlier, getting away from having to rely on doing the leases is going to be important. What we're finding now with China shipping and the freight lines consolidating, and that Port of Los Angeles is claiming that the cargo is now going over to the Port of Long Beach that doesn't have the same environmental requirements. So this whack-a-mole approach may be exactly the wrong thing to do, which would be providing economic incentives to go to the dirtiest operating terminal, one that may cost you less as a result, and then abandoning those ones who have invested in and committed to actually doing the emission reductions. So we need to avoid that, and you guys can put all your PhD minds to this. That would be very, and law degree minds to this. It'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Councilmember Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, you mentioned that there is a difference now in how they're going to assess cancer risk. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
So the two things. The first, there's new methodologies from the state on how to calculate cancer risk, and this is something that happened a couple years ago. Here at AQMD, we updated all of our risk methodologies, all of our permitting rules. We updated all of those methodologies already to take into account this new state procedure for calculating risk. I think what we're finding is that many lead agencies and others are struggling to how do you deal with this now if the same emissions level is a roughly three times higher risk. And so what the CAP says, and it's a little bit buried in there, is that they're proposing to evaluate cancer risk on a case-by-case basis. So as new projects come along, the current standard is that a new project cannot exceed a 10 per million incremental cancer risk. It's kind of a CEQA analysis, right? And it's a very common threshold used many times. But what they're proposing is to maybe evaluate that threshold on a case-by-case basis. So that maybe 10 per million won't be the threshold that will be used. Maybe it'll be a different threshold.
Depending on the project.
Right. There's not a lot of detail on what the criteria would be to determine that threshold.
And, well, WEHA set these standards, right? Then we had to update our whole process because of WEHA standards. Am I thinking this wrong?
Both AQMD and the ports are going to update their calculations and their methodologies for calculating risk. The question is where to set the threshold. So when OWEHA updated their methodology, our board decided to maintain the thresholds that we had in our programs. The ports are opening it up to relook at that threshold.
Okay, so it's still not decided. It's up in the air. Was there any analysis of what impact we would experience from these larger ships that carry, say, 18,000, 20,000 TEUs? How does that change the emissions from the vessels?
In general, if you have a larger ship and you have a larger engine, you could potentially have higher emissions, but some of the newer ships are more recently built, and so they would be more efficient and have maybe a higher tier engine, tier 2 or tier 3 on some of the largest vessels. So the other way to look at it too, though, is maybe on emissions per TEU, and you might actually have a lower emissions per TEU, but a larger emissions per ship, right? So it's the balance of how you look at it, and I think at the end of the day, what we're interested in is sort of emissions per time. You know, how many tons of NOx per day are you getting? And it doesn't matter if it's 12 ships or 2 ships. It's how many tons per day, and that's really, I think, how we're looking at it.
Okay. And now we've looked at their truck program, and some of us have expressed some discontent with the program, and so I'm wondering what staff would recommend. I think it's not I ask, could you have a specific phase out of trucks that don't meet certain standards? That's one issue, one way to do it. I'm wondering about the fee structure that they're thinking of imposing. I'm wondering about the timelines, and you recommend percentage targets. So I'm wondering, as we sitting here as board members and looking at how we do a truck turnover program, or how they do it, what would be reasonable to expect from their program?
I think one of the things that we've really heard from the ports is that they have some discomfort with the concept of banning a certain kind of truck, given sort of the regulatory framework that we have right now. So there's some real discomfort with an outright ban, but there's a lot of gray area between an outright ban and a fee structure of some flavor, or the phase-in that they have for 2014 trucks, near zero emission trucks, into their clean truck program or their drayage truck registry. So there's a lot of wiggle room in there that regulation does allow. And I think what we're trying to explore with them is, well, how do you get more aggressive so you get more turnover? It's not necessarily a ban, but how do you get more turnover and how do you get it faster? So one of the things that we mentioned is, if the rate structure starts in 2023, that might be a little late for our needs. Can you start the rate structure early? The way it's set right now, it's tied to when CARB is proposing to start their new engine standard for near zero emission trucks. That's being proposed to start in 2023, but there's no reason that the CAP program necessarily needs to tie to that. It can maybe be tied to other timelines. One example would be when CARB actually sets the standard in 2019, now that there's certainty of when this regulation is being put in place. Maybe it's tied to commercialization of vehicles and when there's vehicles that are actually commercially available. So there's different ways to actually tie this rate structure and at an earlier date than 2023. So the timing, that's one way to get at it. I think what we're also trying to understand is we have heard that the fees were effective in the past, but the fees also had a backing regulation behind it, right? And that was really critical, that the fees were just a few years in front of this regulation. So there's this dual incentive going on. So fees, we know can be effective, but what is the level of the fee and how is it set, right? And I think trying to get more detail on that. A fee can effectively become a ban, if it's set too high, and we know there's discomfort from the ports on that, I think for many, but what's that sweet spot to get the right amount of turnover and the right sort of consumer incentive?
So is there any possibility, as you suggested in your report, of setting certain percentage targets? Like by X date, certain percentage has to be whatever, the standard that would be required or would be recommended?
I think that would be, I think it would be helpful, actually, if there were targets or goals that were set. Not that those couldn't be reevaluated, but to set those targets to give some certainty for what's everybody aiming for, right? And we've heard that this is a high-level policy document, which it is, but it seems that targets and goals like that are the kind of high-level policy that you want to set in a very large public forum where everybody's paying attention and thinking about this holistically, those targets and goals. This might actually be a good time to set that. What we've heard so far is that those will be evaluated at a later date. There could be some work that is needed to evaluate those of economic studies and feasibility studies. That some of that's there, but setting a goal and a policy and a target, that's ultimately it's a policy decision, right? And so at a minimum, knowing how that is going to be set is very important, certainly for our agency.
And then I'm wondering how all of this that they put into CAP fits into the requirements to meet, the standards for the SIP. Obviously we have to look at that.
Sure, and I think some of that, honestly, is from the direction this is going, it's probably not going to be set by November in this CAP. There's probably just too many details that are needed to satisfy the EPA requirements. It doesn't have to be set by November. We can figure those out as this continues along. We don't have forever. We're going to have to do this over the next few years, but we need to make sure it's on the right path so that we can actually figure this out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Question, if I may. Thank you, Judy. So there have been varied methods of cost estimates from AQMD staff, port staff. You know, if we're going to lobby, obviously this plan is going to cost some dollars, but if we're going to lobby our partners in the state and federal level, we need to know how much we're lobbying for. So can you just help me get through that understanding? You know,
Sure.
you clearly mentioned it's not apples for apples. How can we get to apples so we know what we're lobbying for and getting those dollars down to implement this plan?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that's out there is a lot of these technologies, as they're emerging and as they're becoming commercialized, the costs are changing very rapidly. So when you do your assessment, you can do it today, and in 6 months from now, it's going to look different. And how do you predict that in the future is tough. I think one of the things that we tried to do a little bit in our cost estimate for the AQMP was try to look a little bit in the future. What is it going to look like over now until 2030? The current document from the CAP seems that it's more focused on, well, what is it today? What are the cost ranges today? And let's just assume that stays into the future. What is the future cost of money? Like the details on how to do this can get pretty tricky pretty quick. But I think the biggest challenge on all this is the costs are changing very rapidly. We heard from BYD earlier that the rapid change in those costs. I think there are ways to probably try to get at a unified number, but just knowing that even if you get at a unified number in 6 months, it will likely change. Just this technology is moving so quickly. What we can say is billions is definitely the right number that we need to be thinking about. Our $14 billion number we have in the AQMP is dealing primarily in incremental costs. We think that we can hang our hat on that number for what we're looking at on the time range that we're looking at. There's some infrastructure costs that's a little bit additional here and there's that might not have made it fully into what we have for the AQMP. So there are some differences on what's in and what's out. They need to consider different costs than we need to consider.
Thank you. Supervisor Ashley on the line. Do we still have him on the line? If you had any questions or comments, you may have lost them. Okay, any other questions, comments, members? Okay, with that, thank you so much for your comments and your presentation. At this point now, we'll take public comment on item number 2. Let me remind speakers, you'll have 2 minutes to speak, and I'll have a timer ready. So please line up if you wish to speak on item number 2 before us.
Jim Stewart, Sierra Club Climate Committee, and really appreciate the hard work, the AQMD staff, and bringing some real objective analysis to this. So good job, all, and we all feel for the crunch that Heather and Lisa and the ports are in, because we got to squeeze them, and they can't squeeze themselves. And so, as I wanted to mention, as I passed out this emissions chart on the diesel particulate matter, what's killing us, like I live in West Long Beach, a mile from the port, so I'm breathing this horrible air. And the point is that we've got to set standards on these harbor craft, and that is within ARB's capability. And what I'd like the board is to ask the staff to work with ARB to get the harbor craft cleaned up. I mean, there's no reason why. The ocean-going vessels, that's a federal issue, but the harbor craft, that's ours. We can do that. The issue of the overall NOx reductions that you nailed beautifully, that the ports are not doing their fair share. And so we've got to obviously, the 59%, they've already achieved it, so it's nothing. So we got to push them down. And the way to go is zero emissions. And the reason we need to go zero emissions is because of the greenhouse gases. And my chart shows that the trucks, whether they're CNG or whether they're diesel or whatever, they still got the same huge emissions. And don't buy the renewable natural gas issue, right? I'll talk to you later about that.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon again. Dr. Tom Williams, Sierra Club Transportation Committee. I hope they have a plan B, because generally, we agree with most of the comments made by the staff. Unusual, yes. That is integrity. Integrity of all of the numbers, all of the assumptions, and such like that. But Garcetti specifically said, give me firm dates and numbers so that I can understand what's going to go forward. As part of that, require an annual review of the cap and propose mitigation measures when they don't achieve those numbers and those dates, maybe by year and quarter. Okay, integrity. There were some comments. Effectiveness unclear. Unknown, if any. Those were in your documents. And we agree. And one of the issues will be who's going to give them a SIP credit based upon this plan and its achievements when they're based upon negotiating leases between the ports and the terminals. Because if the terminals don't want to do it, I guarantee there will be a lot of fighting going on. So we're quite concerned, but might say we don't have to submit any comments to you guys, but we will copy you guys with all of our comments regarding the cap. But effectiveness, and what are we talking about? We're talking about dollars versus cancer risks, asthma, and the children of the 710, 110 corridor and the ports. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jesse Marquez, Coalition for a Safe Environment. I want to thank the staff and Ian for some of the areas that they were in discussions and exploring, because now I'd like to say that also take a look at what are your existing rules that you have that can be expanded or updated to cover other areas that, you know, we might want to include or recommend to be in the cap, because by doing that, you know, it helps reduce emissions. Tom kind of alluded to another thing, whereas all of us EJ Organizations Committee supported the backstop rule, and the backup he's asking for would have been in that backstop rule. Right now, you do have the BAC Committee for Best Available Control Technologies. Again, where can new rulemaking or updating of the BCA2 rule affect equipment used at the port? So that, again, we're getting reductions wherever we can. Also, you have to consider outside of the box. Right now, we've been discussing trucks, ships, cargo handling equipment. Well, that's not the only thing polluting at the ports. You know, between the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach, there's about a dozen, you know, marine oil terminals that are importing crude oil, refined fuel products, and things of that nature, where there are fugitive emissions unloading. They have fugitive emissions from all the storage tanks. You know, let's not BS. I know vapor recovery systems exist. I know vapor recovery units exist. They've been existing for the last 15, 20 years. It's time to now make them mandatory, even at the marine terminals, so we capture all emissions. And then you have your bulk loading facilities. We've been talking about trucks. Well, hey, there are zero emission, near zero emission trucks that can be used for cement trucks, flatbed trucks, you know, any type of truck out there practically right now. Where can they be used at these facilities? And then you have facilities that are importing cement, transporting cement, aggregate rock as well as petroleum coke going out. Where can we capture emissions in these other categories? And in terms of funding, we've recommended in the past that a container fee or tariff is the right way to go because it can raise a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other speakers on item number 2 before us? Okay, seeing none. Direct your attention to the agenda. Item number 3, other business colleagues. Questions? No, good. Okay, seeing none. Okay, at this point, general public comment. Any member of the public like to speak on a non-agenda item, please come forward to the microphone now. You'll be given 2 minutes. Okay, seeing none. General public comment, non-agenda item. Jesse, you're up.
Your 2 minutes are starting now, Jesse. You did good exercise running back and forth to the mic.
So what I actually want to submit to you is our preliminary little study of the zero emission and near emission trucks and tractors. It also lists by manufacturer and model number.
Really helpful.
And we are preparing another one that's on construction equipment that we'll have available before the deadline as well. That'll cover dump trucks, cement trucks. We even found that there are 2 manufacturers of dredger machines. So they will convert any diesel operated one right now to all electric or to natural gas. But I've identified 2 now that will be in the next report. So I'll turn this over to you.
Please do. Thank you, Jesse. Okay. Any other general public comment?
Hello, my name is Joe Hauer. I'm principal with Ramble Environ, and I wasn't going to speak, but I just wanted to remind everybody here that there is no such thing as a zero-emission truck. There is no such thing as a zero-emission car. I drive a Chevy Volt. Most of the time, there's nothing coming out of the tailpipe, but the tires are wearing, the brakes are wearing, and the emissions from that are becoming a significant part of the emissions that we look at when we evaluate things like the 710 freeway. And I also have to remind everybody that at least until all of our electricity comes from solar power and other things, there are emissions associated with that. So when you're making a decision about, do I force a move to electric or hydrogen-powered vehicles at 3 times more expense than it would take to get ultra-low emission vehicles, you need to take into account that people think they're getting all the way to zero and they're not. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one last speak on a non-agenda item. Please come forward, Tom.
Dr. Tom Williams, Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. That's 501c3. Basics. One of the reasons why I came down to this committee meeting is that a few blocks away there will be a I-710 EIR meeting. And they say that the 710 will have all of those trucks that exceed the maximum extent given to the railroads. But nobody seems to have a number as to what is the maximum number of containers that are going to go by Alameda Corridor Road versus how many are going to go by I-710. So it's a related issue. We've gotten, I hope, into hospice care, SR-710. So where are all those trucks going to go? Because there was 20,000 going north, 20,000 going south a day in that particular scenario. So we're quite concerned about where are the trucks? Where are the containers? Where are the railroad cars? So I don't know how you will review the I-710 EIR. Thank you.
Thank you.
Todd Campbell with Clean Energy. Just a real quick comment. We were very proud to be a recipient of 2 awards from very distinguished environmental groups over the last couple years as our subsidiary Clean Energy Renewable Fuels produces renewable natural gas. As you know, renewable natural gas is the lowest carbon fuel under the low carbon fuel standard. It has a potential of delivering up to negative 250 carbon intensity. They actually have to do a page break to show the difference in carbon intensity for renewable natural gas versus all the other fuels, including electricity. So I just want to say that we're very proud to be a recipient from the California League Conservation Voters and the Coalition for Clean Air for that achievement. And we're very proud to also say that our penetration since probably 6 or 7 years from now has been up to 60%. So all natural gas vehicles in the state right now are receiving 100% renewable natural gas for 60% of the market. With MTA, with their new contract, we believe that penetration number could go up to 90%. So a very significant milestone because of very strong policies that the state has adopted, and we're delivering it as a very cost-effective fuel to everyone who drives a natural gas vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more speaker.
Hi, Jim Stewart. Maybe we should have a real debate on this renewable natural gas issue, but I do want to give you a little bit of facts on that, is that all the renewable natural gas in California could only meet 3% of our total natural gas consumption right now. And so the question is, what's the highest use? The highest use of this rare commodity of methane from a landfill should go to the most efficient use. The least efficient use of natural gas is trucks. They get about 30% efficiency compared to fuel cells, 90%, right? A power plant that is generating the electricity is 65%. So let's use this rare commodity in the most effective way. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Okay, last call. Well, before, one more. Okay, all right. Sorry, guys.
So real quickly, again, Dwight Hansen, I was with Cummins for a number of years. Now I work for Rush, and we do integration of natural gas fuel systems. I have another kitschy sales saying, it has to make sense, SENSE and CENTS, and talking about going to fuel cells and everything, you might want to add like a 2 or a 3 in front of the billions for $20 to $34 billion to do fuel cells, because it's just not, the technology is just not there yet, and the cost is exorbitant. So to get to 90 to 95% cleanliness with RNG, being able to do it with engines that are over at the clean energy fueling station today, that engine's there today with RNG that can be used today, and we can give Mayor Garcetti the exact numbers that he asks, and the mayor of Long Beach the exact numbers they ask for how much it would be to put those trucks on the roads in the port within 6 months. And you've got the Cummins, the power of Cummins behind it to deliver those engines to them. So I just want to encourage you again to try to do it today with technology we know that works, that we have a Fortune 500 company named Cummins behind, and you have these other companies like Freightliner, Peterbilt, Kenworth, all stacked behind these to put these engines into their trucks to help make the ports as clean as possible, as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe the last comment.
Okay.
Eric Nietros again, GNA. Todd reminded me at a conference that we hosted in Sacramento, the president of NRDC did say that, in his opinion, the highest and best use of renewable natural gas was to put it into transportation. So maybe we should have the debate in the NRDC and Sierra Club. It would be interesting to watch. But I did want to make a comment. In my view, I actually think that there's complete synergy between all of these strategies. I think that's important for us to recognize. Obviously, we all want to live in a world where we have zero emission everything. That's a wonderful vision. It's just really hard to get there today. And we have near zero natural gas trucks, we have the low carbon fuel standard, we have the RFS standard. We have these policies that provide the financial mechanisms to allow us to go capture methane that's otherwise being flared and vented and put it somewhere. We can put it into a vehicle and we can reduce carbon from the transportation. And that is the highest and best use today, because we can put mass volumes of these trucks on the road and address our criteria pollutants at the same time. If in the future the electric truck is more cost effective, better operationally, if the fuel cell truck becomes the go-to, the market will decide that. That renewable natural gas can then be, what do you know, used to run the power plant or to make hydrogen more carbon friendly. So we should harness, I believe, the ability to stick this renewable natural gas, capture it and stick it somewhere today, the heavy-duty trucks, because we can't stick it in power plants. The markets, the financial mechanisms are not there to allow for the investment in the methane mitigation to create power today. We do have that for transportation. Let's recognize it and let's use it. Let's build the resource, which is, by the way, jobs and infrastructure investment in California to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, to create that resource that will be, in the future, able to be used for hydrogen, electric, or whatever the technology might be. So, thank you for your time.
Okay. Well, it's my turn now. Before we adjourn, I'd like to invite everyone to San Pedro this weekend, LA Fleet Week, along the LA waterfront. 5 ships, about 1,500 sailors, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen come down to San Pedro. Free entertainment, ship tours begin tomorrow, and free entertainment on Saturday night, Sunday. Conquer the Bridge is on Monday. And come on down and spend your dollars, wine and dine and shop, and support our local small businesses in the downtown San Pedro area. So with that, we are adjourned. See y'all tomorrow morning.